I was sitting in the kitchen, where my wife once made coffee every morning, when my laptop flashed a red warning, "Access denied. System error." Below it, a notice said the trust account had been locked after unauthorized access at 11 p.m. the night before. Then I saw the name, and my blood went cold, my son-in-law. I closed the laptop and said nothing. After 38 years of risk assessment, I knew a predator only walks into a trap when he believes his prey has noticed nothing. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we dive in, drop a quick comment for me. Have you ever had to protect yourself from someone you trusted? Yes or no, your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Some details are fictionalized for storytelling. What matters most is the lesson it carries. At 60, with 38 years auditing risk at the Federal Reserve, behind me I had learned one absolute truth: nothing is ever random. Monday morning, January 8, 2024, 6:15 a.m. The kitchen window framed Beacon Hill in winter gray bare branches, skeletal against brownstone facades. I stood at the marble counter performing my habitual sequence, 2 drops of glaucoma medication in each eye. Dark roast coffee measured to the gram, laptop opened to the morning's bank notifications. The coffee smelled the same as always, bitter and strong. The taste hit my tongue with familiar precision. But the laptop screen swam slightly, edges softer than they should have been. I blinked twice. The blur persisted. 14 months since Constance passed. 14 months of mornings in this kitchen, without her voice asking if I'd remembered my eye drops, without her hand on my shoulder as she reached past me for the cream. The silence had weight now. I scrolled through them. Overnight alerts. Utility payment cleared. Mortgage interest posted. And then there a line that made my coffee cup pause halfway to my lips. Unauthorized inquiry, Eleanor Cole trust account. Inquiring party, Stellan James Prescott. Timestamp 11:47 p.m., January 7. I set the cup down carefully. The trust had been untouched since Constance's estate settled. $4 million in principal, locked in structures she'd designed with the precision of a watchmaker. Stellan had no legal access to even view the account, much less run inquiries. I closed the laptop, said nothing aloud. The kitchen absorbed the silence. In 38 years evaluating systemic risk, I had learned one rule: there are no accidents, only variables I haven't calculated yet. Stellan was a corporate attorney at a mid-tier Boston firm, competent but unremarkable. He'd married my daughter 4 years ago in a ceremony I'd paid for, but hadn't particularly enjoyed. He smiled at appropriate moments. He brought wine to holiday dinners. He said very little that revealed anything. And now he was accessing accounts that required either my authorization or a court order. Probability that this inquiry was routine, 6%. Probability that my son-in-law knew exactly what he was doing, 94%. I applied another round of eye drops, though the instructions said twice daily, not 3 times. The bottle was nearly empty. I'd need to refill the prescription soon. The blur in my left eye had been worsening for 3 weeks now, a soft haze that no amount of blinking cleared. I drank the rest of the coffee standing at the window, watching the street sharpen and fade with each attempt to focus. 5 days passed. 5 days of applying the same eye drops, brewing the same coffee, watching the same street blur a little more each morning. I said nothing to Vivica when she called on Wednesday to ask how I was feeling. I said nothing to Vernon Ashford, my attorney, though I considered it twice. I was waiting. In risk assessment, you don't react to the first anomaly. You wait for the pattern to declare itself. Saturday, January 13, 11 a.m. The doorbell rang, 2 short chimes I hadn't expected. I opened the door to find my daughter Vivica, 28, and polished in her real estate blazer, standing beside her husband. She held a glossy brochure. Behind them, my granddaughter Clover bolted past in a blur of purple jacket and untied shoelaces. "Grandpa!" she shouted, already halfway up the stairs. "Dad," Vivica said, leaning in for a brief kiss on my cheek. "Sorry we didn't call. We were in the neighborhood. Beacon Hill. They lived in Back Bay." The neighborhood excuse was a lie, but I smiled and stepped aside. Stellan Prescott, 32, followed her in with the practiced stillness of an attorney. He nodded once, shook my hand with appropriate firmness, and said, "Thaddeus, good to see you." His eyes moved across the entryway, taking inventory. Not the casual glance of a guest, the sweep of someone cataloging assets. I led them to the living room. Vivica sat on the leather sofa Constance had reupholstered 3 years before she died. Stellan remained standing, hands in his pockets, positioned near the antique secretary desk that held Constance's wedding china. "Tea?" I asked. "That would be lovely," Vivica said. I returned with the service Earl Grey, the porcelain set Constance's mother had given us in 1986. My hands were steady. The cups didn't rattle. Vivica slid the brochure across the coffee table. "Dad, we've been thinking it might help if you let us manage some of the financial complexities. Just to simplify things." I picked up the brochure. Family Trust Management Solutions. A stock photo of smiling grandparents. Bullet points promising seamless transitions and professional oversight. "What complexities?" I asked. Stellan spoke for the first time. "Estate administration can be burdensome, especially as health issues arise." I looked at him directly. He met my gaze without flinching, but his jaw tightened, micro-expression less than a second. I'd evaluated 11,000 credit portfolios in my career. I knew the exact expression of someone who believes they're about to foreclose on easy collateral. "My health is fine," I said. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Clover burst into the room, 7 years old, with her mother's dark eyes, and climbed onto my lap without asking permission. Her small hands reached up and touched my face. "Grandpa," she said, sudden concern sharpening her voice. "Why are your eyes so red? Did you cry?" Vivica's expression flickered embarrassment, maybe guilt. "Just a little dust, sweetheart," I said. "Nothing to worry about." Clover studied my face with the ruthless honesty of children, then nodded and settled against my chest. She smelled like apple shampoo and winter air. Vivica cleared her throat. "We should get going. Just think about the brochure, okay, Dad? We only want to help." I walked them to the door. Clover hugged me hard, whispering, "I love you, Grandpa," before running to the car. Stellan opened the passenger door for Vivica, with the smooth courtesy of someone who'd learned manners as performance. She slid in, fastening her seatbelt, already looking at her phone. Then Stellan turned back toward the house, toward me, standing in the window. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but I recognized that look. It was not the expression of a worried son-in-law. It was the gaze of the predator, calculating whether the prey had begun to weaken. I stood there long after the car disappeared, holding the brochure in one hand, feeling the weight of my own clouding vision. I would learn soon enough just how long he had been watching. 4 days after that calculating glance, I walked into a pharmacy on Charles Street, 3 blocks from my usual one, carrying the eye drop bottle in my coat pocket like evidence. The predator's look had crystallized my suspicion into certainty. Now I needed proof. Wednesday afternoon, January 17. The independent pharmacy smelled of antiseptic and floor wax, fluorescent lights, harsh against white walls. I approached the counter where a woman in her early 40s stood reviewing prescription labels through wire-rimmed glasses. "Can I help you?" she asked. I set the bottle on the counter. "I'd like this analyzed. Not the label, the actual liquid inside." Her name, plate read, Hannah Caldwell, Farm D. She picked up the bottle, examined the label, Timolol, 0.5%, my name. Dr. Whitfield's signature, then looked at me with the careful neutrality of someone trained not to ask questions too quickly. "May I ask why?" My vision has deteriorated significantly over the past 3 months, I said. Faster than glaucoma progression should allow. I want to know what I've been putting in my eyes. Hannah studied my face for 3 seconds, then nodded. Give me 20 minutes. I sat in one of 2 plastic chairs near the window and watched Charles Street through glass that seemed clearer than my own vision. A mother pushed a stroller past. A man in a business suit checked his phone at the crosswalk. Normal people performing normal actions in a world where sons-in-law didn't systematically poison their aging fathers-in-law. Probably. 23 minutes later, Hannah emerged from the back room. Her expression had shifted from neutral to concerned. "Mr. Garrison," she said quietly, gesturing me back to the counter. "This isn't Timolol." I felt my pulse slow rather than quicken the body's paradoxical response to confirmed disaster. "What is it?" "Pilocarpine. High concentration, probably 4%. It's used for certain eye conditions, but chronic use in someone with your medical history would cause severe pupillary constriction, blurred vision, and progressive visual field loss, exactly what you're describing." The pharmacy's fluorescent hum became suddenly loud in my ears. "Who fills your prescriptions?" Hannah asked. I met her eyes. "Who picks them up, you mean?" "Yes, my son-in-law, Stellan. He's been handling my monthly refills for the past year, since my wife passed." Hannah's jaw tightened. She set the bottle down carefully, as if it might detonate. "Mr. Garrison, you need to call the police. This is—" "Thank you," I said. "How much do I owe you for the analysis?" "Sir, how much?" She looked at me for a long moment, then said, $60. "But I strongly advise. Absolute discretion is appreciated," I said, handing her 320s. "I need you to document this analysis and seal it. Date stamped. I may need it later." Hannah hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I'll prepare a formal lab report. But Mr. Garrison, if someone is deliberately—" "They are," I said, "and I will handle it, but not yet." I walked to my car, unlocked it, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. 11 minutes. I sat there for exactly 11 minutes, long enough to replay the last 14 months and slot every anomaly into its exact place. The helpful offer to pick up prescriptions. The concerned suggestions about managing my finances. The unannounced visit with the glossy brochure. The unauthorized bank inquiry. Stellan had been systematically blinding me while positioning himself to take control of assets I could no longer see clearly enough to protect. My hands did not shake. My breathing remained even. I had learned long ago that panic is the enemy of calculation. I needed data, not emotion. I started the car and drove home. Friday, January 19, 2 days later. The white envelope appeared in my mailbox between the electric bill and a furniture catalog. No stamp. No return address. My name written in careful block letters across the front. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen counter beside my untouched morning coffee. The envelope felt expensive, heavier stock than standard correspondence. I opened it with a butter knife, preserving the seal, a single sheet. Same quality paper. Same careful handwriting. "Mr. Garrison, I know who Stellan Prescott really is. I know what he wants. Check the records of Thomas Vickers' bankruptcy year, 1998, Boston Federal Court, M." I read it twice. Then I walked to my study, opened my laptop, and accessed the federal court's public PACER system. Bankruptcy records are public record accessible to anyone with a PACER account. The search took 4 seconds. Vickers Thomas Edward. DOB 11/4/1944. Credit application filed 3/12/1997. Denied 3/19/1997. Bankruptcy filed 2/4/1998. Chapter 7, Total Discharge. Deceased 8/17/2003. I remembered the file. More than that, I remembered the man. Thomas Vickers had sat across my desk on March 19, 1997, 27 years ago. 53 years old, graying hair, hands that shook as he spread financial documents across the table between us. He'd been asking for a business loan extension, $30,000, to keep a small manufacturing operation alive for 6 more months. The numbers hadn't supported it. Declining revenue, 3 consecutive quarters of losses, supplier contracts already in default. The risk metrics were unambiguous. I had evaluated 11,000 portfolios. This letter, unsigned, hand-delivered, precise, was the margin note on a balance sheet I thought I'd closed decades ago. But I remembered Thomas Vickers for one specific reason. He wept openly. A grown man, 53 years old, sitting in a Federal Reserve conference room, tears running down his face as he begged me to reconsider the analysis. He told me about his employees, 15 people who'd been with him for a decade. He told me about his son still in school, who believed his father built things that mattered. "Please," he'd said, "just 6 months, I can turn it around." I'd looked at him with what I believed was professional compassion and said, "Mr. Vickers, the data doesn't support that conclusion. I'm sorry." He'd left my office in silence. 11 months later, he filed for bankruptcy. 5 years after that, he was dead. And I had stamped his file denied because numbers do not have feelings. I sat at my desk, holding the anonymous letter, looking at the archived credit report on my screen. But someone 27 years later still remembered mine. The anonymous letter sat on my desk all weekend. Thomas Vickers's name staring up at me like an indictment written in my own handwriting. Someone remembered. Someone knew. And that someone wanted me to understand exactly why Stellan Prescott had married my daughter. But understanding motive didn't stop a guardianship petition. I needed strategy. I called Vernon Ashford at 9 o'clock Monday morning, not out of friendship, but because he was the only attorney in Boston too sharp and too hostile toward Stellan's firm to be bought. The phone rang twice before his voice came through dry and precise. "Thaddeus, if you're calling me, someone has made a catastrophic error. Vernon Ashford, 64. Senior partner at Ashford and Monroe, a firm that had been quietly dismantling Stellan's employer in contract disputes for the better part of 3 years. He'd attended Constance's funeral wearing a charcoal suit and said exactly 6 words to me: "She was smarter than all of us." I sat at my home office desk, legal pad in front of me, pen in hand. Through the window, Beacon Hill stretched out in winter gray. My vision blurred the distant details, but I could still see well enough to write. 3 facts, I said. No emotion. Stellan ran an unauthorized inquiry on the trust account 2 weeks ago. My eye drops have been swapped with pilocarpine, confirmed by independent lab analysis. And I received an anonymous letter telling me to look up Thomas Vickers' bankruptcy year 1998. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of confusion, but the silence of a man calculating probabilities at speed. "Pilocarpine," Vernon said finally. "Who handles your prescriptions?" "Stellan. Monthly pickups for the past year." "And the Thomas Vickers connection?" "I denied his commercial loan extension in March 1997. He declared bankruptcy 11 months, died in 2003. I don't know how Stellan connects to him, but someone thinks I should." Another pause. I heard papers rustling, the sound of Vernon moving to a different room. A door closed. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to the tone he reserved for depositions. "Thaddeus, they are preparing a guardianship petition." My hand stopped moving across the legal pad. "You're certain?" "Stellan consulted me 6 months ago," Vernon said. "July, late in the month. He called it a hypothetical scenario, elderly parent with declining vision, concern about financial capacity. What would the probate court require for a guardianship filing?" He was very careful to frame it as academic curiosity, professional development. But I knew it wasn't hypothetical. He was mapping the procedure. I wrote the date on my pad, July 2023. 6 months of planning. Minimum. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Attorney-client privilege applies even to hypothetical consultations," Vernon said. "And at the time I had no proof he was targeting you specifically. But if you're telling me he's now poisoning you and running financial inquiries, is. Then the hypothetical just became actionable, and privilege dissolves in the face of ongoing criminal conspiracy. I heard the scratch of my pen against paper, the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the distant sound of traffic on Charles Street. Normal sounds in a world that had quietly become predatory. What do? I asked. First, stop taking those eye drops immediately. Second, secure the bottle and the lab analysis that's evidence. Third, document everything from this point forward. Dates, times, conversations, visitors. I want a contemporaneous record that would stand up in any courtroom in Massachusetts. And then you let them file the petition, Vernon said. I blinked. You want me to wait? If you confront Stellan now, he'll adjust his strategy. He'll claim the eye drops were a pharmacy error. He'll delete the bank inquiry records. He'll bury whatever connection exists to Thomas Vickers. But if we let him proceed, if we document every move, every conversation, every manipulation, we build a case not just for defense but for prosecution. I had denied 3,000 commercial loans in my career because their UCC filings were flawed, because their projections were optimistic fiction, because the numbers exposed fatal vulnerabilities the borrowers couldn't see. Vernon had just confirmed I was looking at the most personal default of my life. I need you to understand something, Thaddeus, Vernon continued. This isn't a negotiation. This is war disguised as family concern. Stellan has been planning this systematically. He's not improvising, which means we can't afford to improvise either. What are you proposing? I'm proposing we beat him at his own game. I'll represent you. We'll prepare a counter-strategy, but you follow my script precisely. No confrontations, no phone recordings without my explicit approval, no rogue actions that could compromise the case. Do you understand? I looked at the legal pad where I'd written pilocarpine. Bank inquiry, Thomas Vickers, Vernon's timeline, July 2023. I understand, I said. Good. Come to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. Bring the eye drops, the lab analysis, the anonymous letter, and any bank statements showing the inquiry. We'll build the file from there. Vernon, why are you helping me? The question hung in the air between us. Through the phone, I heard him exhale slowly. Because Constance called me 2 weeks before she died, he said quietly. She told me to watch Stellan. She didn't say why, just that if anything ever happened to you, I should assume it wasn't an accident. She was the smartest person I ever opposed in contract law, Thaddeus. If she suspected something, I'm inclined to believe her. My throat tightened. I said nothing. 10 a.m. tomorrow, Vernon repeated. Don't be late. The line went dead. I sat at my desk in the silent house, staring at the legal pad. 6 months. I wrote the number again and underlined it twice. July 2023. 8 months after Constance's funeral. But then I recalculated the calendar. Constance's last hospitalization, March 2022. The days Stellan visited her room with unusual frequency, asking doctors about prognosis, with questions that seemed concerned, but felt clinical. The day, April 2022, when he'd offered to handle my monthly prescription pickups because you have enough to worry about, Thaddeus. She was still alive then, still fighting, and Stellan was already positioning himself at the pharmacy counter, already asking the questions that would map the path from husband to guardian to heir. He didn't start planning when she died. He started planning when he knew she was dying. Knowing Stellan had begun his predation while Constance was still dying changed the calculation entirely. This wasn't opportunistic fraud. This was planned execution, which meant I needed to execute my own plan with equal precision. Vernon had been explicit during our meeting. Massachusetts is a two-party consent state. No recordings, no wiretaps. But listening with my own ears inside my own home was entirely legal. And a contemporaneous signed time-stamped ledger holds weight as a personal business record in Massachusetts court when authenticated under oath. I'd kept such ledgers for 38 years at the Federal Reserve. I still had the last one. Thursday evening, January 25, 6 p.m., The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Vivica and Stellan standing on my front steps, both smiling. Vivica held a manila folder. "Dad, we brought those legacy insurance documents we mentioned," she said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "Just some organizational paperwork. Nothing urgent, but it would help to have your signature." I stepped aside. They entered. Stellan nodded at me with that practiced warmth that had always felt 1 degree too calculated. "Thaddeus," he said, "how are the eyes?" "Stable." I lied. I'd switched to saline drops 4 days ago. My vision was already clearing slightly, the artificial blur Stellan had engineered beginning to recede. "Good to hear," he said. We moved to the second-floor study. I turned on the desk lamp, warm light pooling across mahogany, and gestured for them to sit. Vivica opened the folder, spreading 3 authorization forms across the desk. "These are just for the secondary investment account," she explained. "To make sure we can manage things if you ever need help. Standard estate planning." I picked up the first form. "Read it slowly." It was indeed for a secondary account, one that existed but held minimal value. Vernon had spent Monday morning reviewing every standard form used for secondary account authorization in Massachusetts, a finite set of templates, all publicly registered with the Secretary of State's office for estate planning purposes. "There are only 3 document structures Stellan can legally use for this type of authorization," he'd told me. "I've prepared a void copy of each." I signed the dummy. Then the second. Then the third. Vivica collected them with visible relief. "Thank you, Dad. This just makes everything smoother." "Of course," I said. I stood slowly, one hand on the desk, as if steadying myself. "If you'll excuse me, I'm feeling a bit tired. Long day." "Absolutely," Stellan said, standing immediately. "We'll see ourselves out." I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, each step deliberate. I heard them moving below, footsteps crossing the study papers, rustling. Then I stopped at the top of the staircase, just out of sight from the foyer, and listened. No devices, no microphones. Just my own ears in my own house, exactly as Vernon had instructed. Stellan's voice low and measured. He signed all 3 without reading them. "Vivica, are you sure these will hold up?" "They won't need to," Stellan whispered. He's completely oblivious. 3 more months and it's done. Just stick to the script. A pause. Then Vivica's voice quieter. "What if he talks to someone?" "He won't. Look at him, he can barely see the documents in front of him. By the time he realizes what's happening, we'll already have guardianship." I heard the front door open. Close. The sound of their car starting pulling away. I walked to my bedroom, opened the closet, and retrieved the leather field audit ledger I'd carried to 11,000 commercial evaluations over 38 years. The spine was worn smooth, the pages thick with decades of meticulous documentation. I opened to a fresh page. Wrote the date January 25th, 2024. Time 6:17 p.m. Location Beacon Hill Brownstone Staircase. Then I documented Stellan's exact words in quotation marks, signed my name at the bottom, and added a timestamp. I didn't need high-tech surveillance. I had 38 years of corporate discipline and a leather ledger older than my daughter. 3 months. They had their timeline. I needed mine done in 2. Sunday afternoon, January 28. The doorbell rang again. Vivica stood alone this time, Clover's small hand in hers. "Dad, I have an appointment across town," Vivica said. "Could you watch Clover for a couple hours?" "Of course," I said, kneeling to Clover's level. "We'll have a good time, won't we, sweetheart?" Clover beamed and ran inside, heading straight for the living room rug, where I kept a small basket of her toys. Vivica left. I settled into the armchair with a book, trollop, something I'd been rereading for months, and watched Clover play. She had a plastic tea set, arranged in meticulous order, pouring invisible tea for invisible guests with absolute seriousness. I wasn't reading. I was listening, observing. Every word she spoke, every gesture, every detail. After 20 minutes, she looked up suddenly. "Grandpa," she said, tilting her head. Why does Daddy's phone talk in your voice? I set the book down carefully, kept my tone gentle light. What do you mean, sweetie? Last night, Clover said, returning to her tea set, but still talking. Daddy opened his computer, and Grandpa inside the screen said, I'm so tired I want Vivica to take care of everything for me. But you weren't there. My pulse didn't quicken. My expression didn't shift. In 38 years of high-stakes audits, I'd learned to control every visible reaction. That's strange, I said mildly. What else did the voice say? Daddy played it over and over, Clover said, pouring more invisible tea. Mommy sat next to him, smiling. She said, That's perfect. Save that one. Then Daddy pressed a button, and Grandpa inside the screen said it again, but different words. Something about bank accounts. She looked up at me with complete innocence, waiting for an explanation that made sense in a 7-year-old's world. Sometimes grown-ups practice speeches on computers, I said. It's probably just that. Clover nodded, satisfied, and returned to her tea party. I stood, slowly walked to the kitchen, and pulled a glass from the cabinet. Poured milk. Added 2 spoonfuls of Ovaltine the way she liked it, with extra chocolate. My hands did not shake. AI voice synthesis. Stellan was manufacturing audio evidence of me requesting guardianship, expressing confusion, admitting incapacity. An innocent child describing the mechanics of a malicious crime without understanding its weight. I carried the chocolate milk back to the living room and handed it to Clover. She took it with both hands, careful not to spill, and smiled up at me. Thank you, Grandpa. You're welcome, sweetheart. I poured the milk, adding an extra spoonful of Ovaltine just the way she liked it, and sit there, watching my granddaughter drink chocolate milk, while unknowingly revealing the depth of her father's conspiracy. I realized something. Constance saw this coming before she passed. She knew. She did something about it. I just haven't uncovered her footprints yet, but Vernon was about to show me exactly where she left them. Constance's protective footprints. Whatever they were remained invisible to me. But the enemy's footprints were becoming impossible to miss. The second letter arrived on Tuesday morning, January 30th. Same plain white envelope. Same careful handwriting. Heavier content. I opened it standing in the kitchen, morning coffee untouched on the counter. Thomas Vickers had a son. That son took his mother's maiden name to erase the bloodline. That son currently operates within Prescott and Holt LLP. His mother begs for your forgiveness, M. I read it 3 times. Then I picked up my phone and called Vernon. He answered on the second ring. Thaddeus, second letter, I said. Same sender. Quote, Thomas Vickers had a son. That son took his mother's maiden name to erase the bloodline. That son currently operates within Prescott and Holt LLP. His mother begs for your forgiveness. End quote. Silence. Not the brief pause of consideration, but the stretched silence of a man recalculating an entire case in real time. I waited. The kitchen clock ticked. 20 seconds. 30. Thaddeus, Vernon said, finally, his voice tight and controlled. If this verifies, Stellan doesn't just want the asset portfolio. He wants to dismantle your entire existence. This is a blood vendetta. I know, I said. It makes things much simpler. Simpler? Vernon's tone sharpened. What do you mean by that? When you know someone is actively trying to destroy you. I said, you no longer have to second guess if you are overreacting. The parameters are clear. The risk assessment is complete. All that remains is execution. Another pause. Then Vernon spoke carefully, as if choosing each word with surgical precision. I need you to bring me everything. The letters, the lab analysis, the ledger, the dummy forms they signed. I need it all in my office by end of business today. And Thaddeus, do not confront him. Do not confront Vivica. We are past the observation phase and entering construction. Let me build the defense. You keep your head down. Understood, I said. One more thing, Vernon added. Who is M? I don't know, I said. But whoever they are, they want me to win. I hung up and stared at the letter, the pieces locked together. Thomas Vickers wept at my desk in 1997. His son, raised on that humiliation, married my daughter 23 years later. Not love, not chance. Calculated infiltration spanning 2.5 decades. Stellan's mother's maiden name, Prescott. Stellan's biological father, Thomas Vickers. A name erased. A vendetta inherited. A marriage weaponized. I folded the letter, placed it in the same envelope with the first one, and locked both in my desk drawer. Then I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table watching winter light angle through the windows. By the time I finished the cup, my hands were perfectly steady. Friday afternoon, February 2, 4 p.m. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Vivica standing alone on the front steps. No Stellan. No Clover. Just my daughter, 28 years old, wearing a black wool coat and an expression I didn't recognize. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She entered without the usual kiss on the cheek, without the performative warmth. She walked straight to the living room and sat on the sofa, hands folded in her lap. I sat across from her in the armchair. The afternoon light was pale cold, the kind of February light that exposes rather than flatters. "Dad," she began, then stopped. Started again. "I need to know if you're planning to make this difficult." I said nothing, just watched her. "Stellan thinks you don't understand what's happening," she continued. "But I know you. You've always been 3 steps ahead. So I'm asking directly, are you going to fight us?" I stood slowly, walked to the kitchen, returned, and placed the tampered eye drop bottle on the coffee table between us. Not as a question, as a statement. Vivica stared at it for 2 seconds. Her face didn't change. No shock, no denial, no confusion. Just a slow exhale, as if I'd confirmed something she'd been waiting for me to acknowledge. Then she stood, and the mask came off entirely. "What do you want, Dad?" Her voice was flat cold. "Do you want to cling to this brownstone until you rot in it? Mom left that money so this family could actually live, not for you to sit here hoarding it while you go blind alone." I didn't move, didn't speak, just held her gaze. "You're 60, she continued, her voice rising slightly. "Nearly blind, and you have no one left. Clover asks about you, sure, but in 5 years she won't remember these visits. You're not her future. We are. You're just a temporary custodian holding our money." The words landed with perfect clarity, no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. I stood there for 10 slow seconds. Long enough to memorize every detail, her posture, the set of her jaw, the absolute absence of filial warmth. Long enough to log it. Long enough to know I would never forget this moment. Then I reached down, picked up the eye drop bottle, and placed it back into my vest pocket. "Go home, Vivica," I said quietly. "It's getting dark." She stared at me, perhaps expecting argument, perhaps expecting collapse. When neither came, she turned and walked to the door. She paused there, hand on the knob, and looked back. "You could have just let us help you," she said. "This didn't have to be adversarial." "Yes," I said. "It did." She left. The door closed. I heard her car start pull away. I returned to the armchair and sat in the fading afternoon light. That was the last time I heard my daughter's real voice before the wheels turned. As I watched her walk out the door, one final audit crossed my mind. In 38 years of risk assessment, I had never reviewed a portfolio where I desperately wanted my calculations to be wrong. Until today. But the numbers, as always, told only the truth. The legal battle I'd calculated was now inevitable. Monday morning, February 5th, I arrived at Vernon's office carrying everything: the letters, the ledger, the lab analysis, the tampered bottle sealed in an evidence bag. Vernon's office occupied the 22nd floor of a glass tower on State Street, overlooking Boston Harbor, a location chosen I suspected for its psychological advantage during high-stakes negotiations. Met me in the reception area, shook my hand once, and led me to a corner conference room. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the harbor in winter gray. A woman in her early 30s sat at the table, laptop, open, legal pad positioned with geometric precision. Thaddeus, Vernon said, "This is Sophia Bentley, my senior legal assistant. She's been working on your case since our first call. Everything discussed in this room is privileged." Sophia stood, shook my hand with firm professionalism. "Mr. Garrison, I've reviewed the documentation you provided. It's methodical." 38 years of field audits, I said. "The habit stays with you." We sat. Vernon opened a leather portfolio and slid a single sheet across the table. "This," he said, "is the counter-strategy. 3 steps. No improvisation. No deviation. Are you prepared to follow it exactly?" "Yes," I said. Vernon tapped the first bullet point. "Step 1, let them file the guardianship petition. Do not contest it. Do not hire a separate attorney. Do not make any public statements. When they serve you, you accept service gracefully. When the hearing is scheduled, you attend with me and say nothing unless I explicitly instruct you." I nodded. "Step 2. Vernon continued, moving to the second point. "The moment the petition is filed, I will notify the probate court that a pre-existing secured interest exists on all trust assets under UCC Article 9. Constance executed and perfected a security agreement with the Massachusetts Secretary of State on April 14, 2022. I stopped breathing. "April 2022, I repeated, 5 months before she died. "Correct," Vernon said. "She registered a blanket UCC-1 financing statement covering the entire trust corpus, $4 million in principal, the Beacon Hill property, all derivative accounts. It's been sitting dormant for 16 months, perfected and enforceable, waiting for exactly this scenario." Sophia pulled up a document on her laptop and turned the screen toward me. "Massachusetts Secretary of State, filing, stamped and dated. Constance's signature at the bottom, unmistakable even through the digital scan." "Step 3, Vernon said. "If when they obtain guardianship and attempt to liquidate or transfer any trust assets, the UCC lien triggers an automatic clawback under Section 9-3155. Any proceeds from the collateral remain subject to the security interest. The moment they wire funds, we file for immediate enforcement. The transfer freezes mid-transaction. The money comes back." I stared at the filing on Sophia's screen. April 14, 2022. Constance had been hospitalized twice that month. Her vision was failing. Her strength was fading. And she was executing commercial security agreements with the precision of a Federal Reserve auditor. "What's the perfection mechanism?" I asked. "Control agreement or filing-based?" Vernon's eyebrows lifted slightly. Sophia's fingers paused over her keyboard. "Control-based for the deposit and trust accounts," Vernon said. Constance executed a tri-party deposit account control agreement with State Street Bank in April 2022. The bank, Constance as grantor, and Ashford and Monroe as secured party. That's the only permissible perfection method for deposit accounts under Massachusetts UCC Section 9-312. For the securities and investment accounts, she filed a UCC-1 financing statement with the Secretary of State. Filing is permissible for investment property under Section. "And the collateral description?" I asked. "Specific," Sophia said, recovering quickly. "Account numbers, securities, SUSIP identifiers, brokerage references. 2 separate perfection documents covering every asset class. It's watertight." I leaned back in my chair. "A UCC lien is a commercial trap, invisible until triggered, absolute when executed, unassailable if perfected correctly." I had rejected hundreds of loan applications because their UCC filings were flawed, wrong collateral descriptions, missed filing deadlines, insufficient debtor identification. Constance had made no such errors. "Where did you learn commercial code?" Vernon asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "I didn't," I said. "But I rejected 3,000 commercial loans over 38 years because their UCC filings were flawed. Incorrect Article 9 priority positions, defective security agreements, improperly perfected interests. I couldn't draft one myself, but I know exactly what a correct filing looks like." Sophia and Vernon exchanged a glance. "Constance knew that, didn't she?" Vernon said quietly. I nodded. She knew I'd recognize the mechanism even if I couldn't have designed it. Vernon slid another document across the table. The original security agreement, notarized and witnessed. I recognized the notary's name, someone from Vernon's firm. "She came to me in March 2022, Vernon said. "Told me she had 6 months, maybe 8. She asked me to prepare this structure with absolute confidentiality, even from you. She said, when the time came, I'd know, and that you'd understand." I picked up the document. The pages felt heavier than paper should. Constance's signature appeared on page 7, dated April 14th, 2022. Her hand still steady despite the tremor I'd noticed starting that spring. I set the document down carefully. "She saw this coming," I said. "She saw him," Vernon corrected. "She told me in March, Stellan has been asking questions about the trust structure. Too many questions, too technically precise. He's mapping it." She didn't know about the Thomas Vickers connection. She didn't have that piece. But she knew predatory intent when she saw it. "And she built the trap anyway," I said. "She built it," Vernon confirmed. "Filed it, perfected it, and left me a letter of instruction that said, and I quote, 'Vernon when they come for him, and they will make sure the trap closes completely. No mercy, no settlements. He raised our daughter to know better. If she chooses this path anyway, she earns the consequences.'" The conference room went quiet. Outside, a ferry crossed the harbor, its wake spreading white against gray water. Sophia closed her laptop gently. "Mr. Garrison, your wife was formidable." "Yes," I said. "She was." Vernon stood. "We wait for them to file. When they do, the clock starts. And Thaddeus, when this is over, they will have nothing. Are you prepared for that outcome?" I thought of Vivica's cold voice. "You're just a temporary custodian holding our money." "Yes," I said. "I am." I drove home along Storrow Drive, watching the Charles River through a windshield that seemed clearer than it had in months. My vision was returning. The pilocarpine haze was lifting. For the first time in 14 months, I felt her presence clearly. "Constance, you designed the lock. I am merely turning the key." But first, they had to spring it. Constance had designed the trap. Now I needed to let them spring it. The envelope arrived. Wednesday morning, February 7th. Heavy cream paper, Suffolk County Probate and Family Court seal embossed in the corner. The words, "Service of Process," stamped in red ink. I opened it standing at the kitchen counter. The petition was 11 pages, single-spaced, filed by Vivica Ann Garrison and Stellan James Prescott, as petitioners seeking appointment as co-guardians of person and estate. The language was clinical, precise. Respondent exhibits severe cognitive decline, progressive visual disorientation, and inability to manage complex financial instruments. Medical evaluation supports finding of incapacity pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 190B, Section 5306. Attached as exhibit, a psychiatric affidavit from Dr. Kingsley Norwood, Cambridge psychiatrist, certifying I exhibited symptoms consistent with early-stage dementia and visual cognitive impairment. Attached as Exhibit B, digital audio file time-stamped and notarized, wherein a voice identified as mine stated clearly, "I'm so tired. I want Vivica to take care of everything for me. I can't do this anymore." The AI synthesis was flawless. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed it was my own voice. Hearing date June 8, 2024. 4 months away. 14 weeks to prepare. I picked up my phone and called Vernon. "It's filed," I said. "Excellent." Vernon replied, no hesitation. "Let the clock run. Do not respond. Do not contact them. Do not explain yourself to anyone except me. The petition is public record now, which means discovery opens. Sophia is already running forensics on their evidence chain." Understood. "And Thaddeus, they will begin acting like they've already won. Let them. Overconfidence breeds sloppiness." I hung up. Opened my leather ledger to a fresh page. Wrote the date June 8, 2024. Then counted backward, marking every week with a vertical line. 14 weeks. Not out of anxiety, but because an auditor must always know exactly how much time remains to balance the books. Mid-February. Vernon's office. Sophia sat across the conference table, laptop open, 3 file folders stacked beside her. "Dr. Kingsley Norwood," she said, tapping the first folder. "Licensed psychiatrist, Cambridge practice, specializes in geriatric cognitive assessment. On paper, he's perfectly credentialed." "And off paper?" Vernon asked. Sophia opened the laptop, turned the screen toward us. A spreadsheet, color-coded. "In the last 3 years, Dr. Norwood has signed 4 nearly identical affidavits certifying sudden-onset cognitive incompetence in elderly patients. All 4 cases were contested estate disputes. 2 resulted in successful guardianship appointments and subsequent asset liquidations. In both cases, the petitioners were adult children or spouses who paid Dr. Norwood's consultation fees in cash." Vernon leaned forward. "Cash payments, documented in his office ledger, which I obtained through a medical board subpoena we filed yesterday." Sophia said. $5,000 per evaluation. No insurance billing. No Medicare claims. Just cash consultations for families seeking incapacity certifications." I stared at the spreadsheet. 4 cases. 4 identical diagnoses. 4 families fighting over money. "He's selling diagnoses," I said. Sophia nodded. "And Stellan found him. The consultation fee for your evaluation was paid February 1st, 6 days before the petition was filed. $5,000 cash, signed receipt." Vernon closed the laptop. "I'm filing an ethics complaint with the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Medicine today. Dr. Norwood's affidavit will be under investigative cloud by the time we reach the June hearing. But that's defensive. We need offense." He turned to me. "You need a legitimate medical evaluation. Independent, unimpeachable, forensically sound. I've arranged an appointment with Dr. Desmond Whitfield at Massachusetts Eye and Ear. He's the best ophthalmologist in Boston, no financial ties to either party, and his reputation is bulletproof." When I asked. "Tomorrow," Vernon said. 2 p.m. 2 parallel tracks ran simultaneously, now civil litigation at Suffolk County Probate Court and professional fraud investigation at the Massachusetts Board of Medicine. Stellan had built his fortress on quicksand. He just didn't know it yet. Thursday, February 8. Massachusetts Eye and Ear Infirmary Examination Room on the 4th floor. Dr. Desmond Whitfield, 52 and precise in his movements, examined my eyes with a slit lamp. His face illuminated by the instrument's blue light. He adjusted the focus, twice leaned closer, then sat back and made notes on his tablet without speaking. He turned off the examination lamp and pulled up imaging on the wall screen, my retinas in high resolution, the damage visible even to my untrained eye. "Mr. Garrison," he said quietly, "you stopped in time. Another 8 weeks and I could not have made this prognosis." I sat in the examination chair, hands folded in my lap. "I have laboratory analysis confirming the eye drops I was using contained pilocarpine instead of the prescribed timolol," I said. "My son-in-law handled the prescription pickups. He is currently petitioning for guardianship based on my supposed visual and cognitive decline." Dr. Whitfield set down his examination tools, looked at me directly for the first time. "You're telling me this was deliberate?" "Yes. I was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned back to his tablet, made additional notes, his stylus moving with careful precision. I will document everything, he said. The pilocarpine exposure, the timeline, the reversible nature of the damage, the absence of any underlying pathology that would explain your symptoms. This is a forensic medical report, Mr. Garrison. It will state unequivocally that your visual impairment was chemically induced, not neurological or age-related. Will you sign it? I asked. He looked at me again. His expression was unreadable, not hostile, not sympathetic, just considering. Let me consider the implications, he said carefully. I nodded, stood, shook his hand. Thank you, Dr. Whitfield. I drove back to Beacon Hill thinking about those 3 words. Let me consider. In 38 years of risk assessment, I had learned that when someone says, let me consider, instead of a flat refusal, they are simply looking for a sufficiently moral reason to say yes. And I was about to give him several. The moral justification Dr. Whitfield needed arrived 3 days later, in the form of a document. Sophia discovered one that transcended medical testimony and entered the territory of premeditated murder. Late February, the conference room at Ashford and Monroe looked out over Boston Harbor, winter light pale and unforgiving, through floor-to-ceiling glass. Sophia sat across from Vernon and me. Her laptop closed a single certified document centered on the table between us. She placed a single certified document on the conference table, an insurance amendment that would redefine the scope of Stellan's calculations. I completed the corporate forensics you requested. Sophia said, her voice carefully neutral. Standard procedure background check on Stellan's business entities, corporate filings, financial relationships. I found something. She slid the document toward me. Amendment to primary life insurance policy. I read aloud. Insured Vivica Ann Garrison Prescott. Policy number 8473392A. Effective date November 12, 2023. I scanned down to the key section. Primary beneficiary changed from estate of insured to Meridian Consulting LLC registered agent Delaware. The signature line showed Stellan James Prescott, attorney in fact, via corporate power of attorney dated November 1st, 2023. I set the document down. Looked at Sophia. Explain, I said. Sophia opened her laptop, turned the screen toward me. Corporate registry filings traced through 3 jurisdictions. Harborview Strategic LLC was incorporated in Delaware on June 18, 2023. Registered agent is a virtual office service, blind address, no physical presence. The incorporation documents list a management company as the sole member, which itself is controlled by a third-party entity based in Nevada. I traced it through 4 shell layers before hitting a wall. What does that mean? I asked, though I already knew. It means, Vernon said quietly, that Vivica's life insurance policy, worth $1.8 million, now pays out to an entity she doesn't control, has never heard of, and has no legal connection to her estate or her heirs. Sophia pulled up another document. The corporate power of attorney Vivica signed gives Stellan authority to manage all insurance and estate planning instruments on behalf of spouse. It's broad language, technically legal. She signed it in October, probably thinking it was routine paperwork. When was the beneficiary changed? I asked. Sophia glanced at her notes. November 12, 2023. 3 weeks after the power of attorney was executed. 2 months before the guardianship petition was filed. I stared at the document. The numbers assembled themselves into a sequence I recognized from 1,000 risk assessments. Motive means timeline, escape route. Vernon, I said, walk me through what this means. Vernon leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. When he spoke, his voice had the careful precision of a prosecutor building a case. If Vivica dies while this policy is in force, $1.8 million flows to Harborview Strategic LLC. That entity has no legal obligation to distribute funds to Vivica's heirs, meaning Clover receives nothing. The shell structure suggests the true beneficiary is someone Stellan controls or has an arrangement with. Possibly himself through a layered ownership scheme Sophia hasn't been able to penetrate yet. He paused, letting the implications settle. Thaddeus, this is the knife Stellan kept hidden from your daughter. Vivica has no idea she's worth more to him dead than alive. The conference room went silent. Through the windows, I watched a tanker move slowly across the harbor, its wake spreading in perfect geometric lines. In 38 years, I had evaluated portfolios worth billions, denied loans that would have saved businesses, approved financing that built empires, calculated risk across every imaginable financial instrument. This single-page amendment was the most expensive document I had ever held. Does this change the guardianship strategy? I asked. Vernon shook his head. No. It expands the criminal case. Insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, possibly conspiracy to commit murder, if we can prove intent. But the guardianship trap remains the same. We let them win, let them try to move the money, then enforce Constance's UCC lien and watch everything collapse. And this, I tapped the insurance amendment. This, Vernon said, we log into the master file, document it, preserve it. And when the FBI gets involved, and they will once the wire fraud triggers federal jurisdiction, we hand them a conspiracy that goes far beyond financial exploitation. Sophia closed her laptop. Mr. Garrison, there's one more thing. I traced the incorporation date. She pulled up a timeline on her tablet, turned it toward me. June 18, 2023, Harborview Strategic LLC Incorporated. July 22, 2023, Stellan consults Vernon about guardianship procedures. November 12, 2023, life insurance beneficiary changed. February 7, 2024, guardianship petition filed. I traced the incorporation date with my finger. June 2023. 8 months before the petition. 6 months before he changed the insurance beneficiary. A year before we were sitting in this conference room, he had been building the scaffold for her death before he ever filed to take her money. Vernon leaned forward, his voice dropping. Thaddeus, I need to ask you a question, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. I looked at him. Will you tell her? He asked. Will you tell Vivica that her husband has restructured her life insurance so that she's worth $1.8 million dead and zero alive? The question sat between us like a live grenade. If I told her, she might leave him, might file for divorce, might escape with her life intact. But she would also warn Stellan consciously or unconsciously, and he would adjust his strategy. Delete evidence. Restructure the shell companies. Abandon the guardianship petition and find another angle. The trap Constance had built would spring on empty air. If I stayed silent, Vivica remained in danger. But Stellan would proceed exactly as planned, walking straight into the UCC lien, the criminal charges, the federal investigation that would dismantle his entire conspiracy. Justice or safety? The trap or my daughter's life? For the first time in 38 years of weighing risk against return, I was being asked to weigh something I had no formula for. Log it into the master file, I said finally. Vernon held my gaze for 3 long seconds. Then he nodded. Sophia gathered the documents without speaking. I drove home along Storrow Drive, watching the Charles River glint under late February sun. The ice was breaking up, dark water showing through in jagged patterns. I now held a piece of information that transcended currency, transcended calculation, transcended every risk assessment I had ever performed. In my career, I had always known what to do with numbers. This was the first time I had to weigh a soul, and the scale was not yet balanced. The scale would balance itself because Constance had already weighted it years before I ever stood at the fulcrum. The third letter arrived the first week of March, not a single page this time, but 3 sheets folded carefully, the handwriting familiar, but the weight entirely different. I opened it at the kitchen table, morning light falling across the pages. Mr. Garrison, my name is Renee Townsend. I am Stellan's mother. I know what my son has done. I have wrestled with silence for 6 months, sending you fragments when I should have delivered the whole story. forgive me. I did not know Stellan was pursuing this until 6 months ago, when I found documents in his office, guardianship drafts, recordings of your voice you never spoke. I confronted him. He said you deserved it, that you destroyed his father. But you must understand, your wife contacted me 8 months before she passed. March 2022. She knew exactly who Stellan was. She knew his father was Thomas Vickers. She knew the vendetta Thomas had whispered into our son's ear from childhood. She kept it from you to spare you pain while she was dying. But she did something unalterable with that trust fund. Her words to me: "Renee, your son will come for my husband after I'm gone. I cannot stop what's coming, but I can build the cage before it arrives. Thaddeus will find it. He always finds the anomaly. I am a retired nurse from Massachusetts General. I raised Stellan alone after Thomas died in 2003. I loved my husband, but I will not defend what he became or what he made our son believe. I have enclosed my number. If you are willing to meet, I will tell you the truth about 1993. Renee." I read it 3 times. Then I called Vernon. "Constance knew," I said. "She built the cage before she died. Thaddeus will find it. He always finds the anomaly." I reread her words. That was Constance's voice filtered through another woman's pen, reaching across 14 months to tell me she had seen everything coming. Mid-March, Saturday afternoon. The cafe on Massachusetts Avenue sat between a bookstore and a guitar shop espresso machine. Hissing Harvard students hunched over laptops. I arrived early, ordered black coffee I didn't drink, and waited. Renee Townsend walked in at 2 p.m. exactly, 58 years old, with exhausted eyes that hadn't known peaceful sleep in years. Gray hair pulled back, simple clothes. A retired nurse from Massachusetts General, haunted by her son's inheritance of his dead father's rage. She sat across from me without ordering. "Mr. Garrison," she said quietly, "thank you for meeting me." "You've been sending evidence for 2 months," I said. "We're past formalities." She nodded, hands folded on the table, wedding ring worn thin. "Ask me," she said, "what really happened between Thomas Vickers and Constance in 1993. Renee looked down. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible over the cafe noise. "Nothing happened. They met once. April 1993, Providence Medical Technology Convention at the Biltmore. Thomas was there for his manufacturing company. Constance was there for estate planning seminars. Same lobby, same time, surrounded by 400 attendees." She paused. "Thomas saw her across the room. Tried to strike up conversation near registration. She was polite, professional. 5 sentences, weather conference schedule, nothing substantive. Then she excused herself and left. Constance likely never remembered his name. But he remembered hers," I said. "He came home and told me he'd met the most remarkable woman. Talked about her for weeks. When I asked if they'd exchanged information, he said no, but he'd find a way to reconnect." She looked up, eyes red. "Then in 1997, you denied his loan. His business collapsed. Bankruptcy followed. And somewhere in his grief, Thomas connected 2 facts. The woman he'd obsessed over was married to Thaddeus Garrison. And Thaddeus Garrison was the auditor who denied his loan. He built a narrative," I said. "He built a mythology," Renee corrected. "In his mind, you had stolen his future twice, once by denying him capital, once by stealing the woman who represented everything he'd lost. Completely irrational. Completely unfounded. But Thomas drilled that story into Stellan from age 8 until the day he died." The espresso machine hissed. Students laughed nearby. The world continued as if we weren't discussing the archaeology of a vendetta. "Stellan doesn't hate you for anything you did wrong, Mr. Garrison," Renee said quietly. "He hates you because his father couldn't handle the fact that you did your job right." I sat back. Thomas Vickers wept at my desk in 1997 because the numbers said no. 27 years later, his son married my daughter to make the numbers say yes by force. Why are you helping me? I asked. Because Constance asked me to, Renee said. In her letter she wrote, when this happens, help Thaddeus understand it's not his fault. Help him see the full picture. And if you can stop your son before he destroys himself completely. She stood. I couldn't stop him, but I could give you the tools to defend yourself. I watched her walk out into the Cambridge afternoon. I sat there, another 20 minutes, coffee cold, watching students bent against the March wind through the window. Some people are utterly ruined by stories told by dead men, narratives they were never present to refute. Stellan Prescott was one of them. It didn't absolve his crimes, but it illustrated the true cost of a correct decision made 27 years ago, and that cost was still accruing. The cost of that 27-year-old decision had been accruing in ways I couldn't have calculated. But Constance had, and she'd paid it forward before leaving me alone to face the reckoning. Late March, Ashford and Monroe Conference Room, afternoon amber light, slanting through windows, overlooking the harbor. Vernon placed a slender file on the table with a reverence I had never seen him show for any document, not in court filings, not in settlements, not in 40 years of practice. This, he said quietly, is what your wife did before she left. I opened the file. The first page was a letter of instruction dated June 3, 2022. Constance's handwriting clear and precise. To Vernon Ashford Esquire, if you are reading this, I am gone, and someone likely, Stellan Prescott, has filed a guardianship petition against my husband within 5 years of my death. You are hereby instructed to immediately enforce the security interest described in the attached UCC Article 9 security agreement. Do not warn Thaddeus in advance. Do not negotiate. Do not settle. Enforce completely. He will understand when the trap closes. Constance. I turned to the next page. UCC 1 financing statement filed with the Massachusetts Secretary of State, April 14, 2022. Debtor Thaddeus Garrison. Secured party Ashford and Monroe, LLP. Collateral all assets held in the Eleanor Garrison Trust, comprising approximately $4 million in securities investment accounts and cash equivalents, each identified by specific account number and SUSIP identifier in the attached schedule. I looked at Vernon. She did this 5 months before she died, he said. Came to me in June already knowing she had less than 6 months. Said she needed to create an unbreakable security interest that would survive any guardianship, proceeding, any probate challenge, any attempt to seize or redirect the trust assets. He pulled out another document, the security agreement itself, notarized and witnessed. The mechanism is the same one we described in March, Vernon said. She filed it. It holds. The moment he tries to move money, we enforce, and every cent of that attempt becomes federal wire fraud evidence. He paused. She built this structure to protect you from a threat she couldn't fully name. She named it anyway in the only language she knew would last. I traced Constance's signature on the state filing form. Her hand had still been steady then, before the final decline. She didn't tell you, Vernon continued, because she knew your professional pride would have interfered. You would have wanted to fight it yourself, wanted to prevent the guardianship petition before it was filed. But she understood something crucial. The trap is most effective when the predator believes the prey is defenseless. Constance did this entirely alone, retained independent counsel, executed the security agreement, filed it with the state, left instructions for enforcement. She kept it from me because she knew my world better than I did. Vernon, I said quietly, she didn't just leave me a legacy. She left me the shield and the sword. He nodded. And she left explicit instructions on exactly when to use them. Early April. Same conference room, different revelation. Sophia spread corporate documents across the table like a credit analyst mapping systemic risk. Her laptop displayed a schematic names, entities, shell companies, linking arrows. I completed the deep background on Stellan James Prescott, she said. It gets worse. I leaned forward. In 2021, Stellan faced a formal disbarment recommendation from the Virginia State Bar Association for forging client authorization signatures on estate documents. 3 separate complaints, 2 from elderly clients whose assets were redirected without their knowledge. How is he still practicing? I asked. The proceeding was quietly deferred, Sophia said, pulling up Bar Association records. Behind-the-scenes intervention by Harrison Prescott, senior partner at Prescott & Holt LLP and the man whose surname Stellan adopted when his firm hired him. She clicked to another document. Harrison Prescott holds a hidden 18% equity stake in Vivica's real estate brokerage. The investment was structured through a Delaware shell company, Meridian Holdings LLC Incorporated 2020. The ownership trail took me 3 days to trace. Vernon walked to the window. When he spoke, his voice was cold. Harrison Prescott didn't just shield Stellan from disbarment. He's an equity investor in this asset seizure. When Stellan gains control of your trust and liquidates it, Harrison's shell company receives 18% of Vivica's brokerage profits, which will surge once she has access to $4 million in capital. I stared at the schematic Sophia had drawn on the whiteboard. Names. Money flows. Corporate entities layered like matryoshka dolls. This isn't the first time, Sophia said quietly. I found 2 other cases in Virginia where Stellan represented elderly clients in guardianship proceedings. Both cases resulted in asset transfers to family members, who then made substantial payments to entities Harrison controlled. The pattern is unmistakable. Vernon turned from his window. Thaddeus, this isn't a family betrayal. It's organized corporate racketeering. Stellan has done this before, with firm backing and legal cover. You're not fighting your son-in-law. You're fighting a firm that has systematized elder exploitation. I stood slowly, walked to the whiteboard, traced the lines Sophia had drawn Stellan to Harrison, to the shell companies, to the previous victims. File the evidence, I said. Both the Virginia State Bar and the Massachusetts Board of Bar Overseers. Simultaneously. Include everything: the 2021 disbarment proceeding, the hidden equity stake, the pattern across multiple cases. Vernon pulled out his phone. I'll contact the FBI field office. Wire fraud across state lines is federal jurisdiction. The moment Stellan tries to transfer your assets, it triggers RICO, Racketeer Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act. Not just fraud, organized criminal conspiracy. Sophia closed her laptop. Mr. Garrison, when this breaks, it won't just destroy Stellan. It'll bring down Harrison Prescott and potentially the entire firm. Good, I said. I looked at the schematic one more time. This wasn't a family betrayal. It was a corporate raid. Stellan had run this playbook before: identified vulnerable elderly targets, manufactured medical evidence, secured guardianship, liquidated assets, paid percentages to his corporate backers. And he would run it again unless he was permanently dismantled. But Constance had given me the tools to do exactly that. Constance had given me the tools. Now I needed to use them not just defensively, but to manipulate the enemy into overconfidence. Vernon's script was precise: exhibit, calculated cognitive decline over 3 weeks, make Stellan believe the pilocarpine was working faster than it actually was, and never break character in his presence. Late April. Thursday evening. Vivica and Stellan arrived for dinner, unannounced, a pattern that had become frequent since the petition was filed. We sat in the dining room, spring light fading outside. Vivica had brought takeout from a North End restaurant. The smell of garlic and basil filled the room. Dad, Vivica said, serving pasta onto my plate. How are you feeling? I looked at her, let my eyes lose focus for just a moment, then blinked. I'm sorry, what day is this? Thursday, she said carefully. Right, Thursday. I nodded, took a bite of pasta, chewed slowly, then looked up. Wait, Didn't we have this conversation on Tuesday? Vivica glanced at Stellan. He was watching me with the stillness of a predator assessing prey. Dad, today is Thursday, Vivica said gently. We talked about your doctor's appointment yesterday. Wednesday. Oh. I set my fork down. Of course, Wednesday. I remember now. Stellan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, slightly, glanced at the screen, typed something quickly. I saw the corner of his mouth twitch into a smile. I was filing his field report. Excellent. Over the next 3 weeks, I performed the decline with methodical precision. Forgot the name of a Federal Reserve colleague I'd worked with for 20 years. Asked Vivica twice in the same visit when Clover's birthday was. Mixed up Monday and Friday during a phone conversation. Each lapse carefully calibrated. Each confusion perfectly timed. Each mistake documented by Stellan's buzzing phone. I was manipulating him like a marionette. Each calculated lapse. A string pulled. Each repeated question. A weight added to his confidence. He believed the pilocarpine was accelerating my cognitive decline. He believed victory was inevitable. But the performance had one ironclad rule: never break character except with Clover. Saturday afternoon, early May. Clover sat on the living room floor with her coloring books spread in a careful arc. Purple-colored pencils, her favorites, arranged by shade. "Grandpa," she said, not looking up from her drawing, "can you help me spell butterfly?" "Butterfly, I said, sitting in the armchair with a book. "Thanks." She colored in silence for a moment, then looked up. "Grandpa, do you remember my friend Emma from school? The one who likes dinosaurs?" "Yeah," Clover beamed. "She brought a T-Rex toy for show and tell yesterday. Did she let you hold it?" "She let everyone hold it. It was so cool. We talked for 20 minutes. I remembered every detail: Emma's dinosaur obsession, her teacher, Miss Holland's name, the field trip to the aquarium scheduled for next month. Then Clover stopped coloring, looked at me with sudden clarity. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "why do you forget things with Mommy and Daddy, but you always remember with me?" I set my book down, knelt beside her on the floor. "Because Grandpa never forgets the things that actually matter," I said gently, touching her hair. She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded, satisfied, and returned to her butterfly. I walked to the window, and watched Beacon Hill in the afternoon light. Stellan's phone had buzzed 17 times over 3 weeks. He was building a case file of my decline, documenting every lapse, every confusion, every sign that the poisoning was working. He had no idea I'd stopped using the tampered eye drops in January, that my vision was clearing, that every mistake was theater. I had no idea the fortress he was building stood on quicksand. Early May, 2 weeks before the hearing, my phone rang. "Dr. Whitfield." "Mr. Garrison," he said without preamble, "I need to inform you of a development." "Go ahead." "The Massachusetts Board of Registration in Medicine has launched a formal fraud investigation into Dr. Kingsley Norwood. 3 of his past psychiatric incompetence reports are under official review for pattern fraud. All 3 cases involved elderly patients in contested guardianship proceedings. All 3 resulted in asset transfers to family members." I sat down at the kitchen table. "Additionally," Dr. Whitfield continued, "a colleague of mine at Mass General was questioned yesterday by board investigators regarding suspicious patient referrals to Stellan Prescott's law firm. The pattern they're uncovering suggests systematic exploitation." "Will the investigation conclude before June 8th? I asked. "Unlikely," Dr. Whitfield said. "But the existence of an active investigation will be part of the court record. Dr. Norwood's affidavit is now under official scrutiny." He paused. I heard papers rustling. "Mr. Garrison, I refuse to stay silent while they chemically blind a patient under my care. My forensic ophthalmology report is signed, notarized, and ready for court. I will testify at the hearing." "Thank you, Dr. Whitfield," I said. "Don't thank me," he replied firmly. "This is medical ethics. What was done to you is criminal. The pilocarpine concentration in those eye drops would have caused permanent vision loss within another 8 weeks. You are fortunate you stopped using them when you did. I am, I said quietly. The hearing is June 8th, he asked. Yes, 10 a.m., Suffolk County Probate Court. I'll be there, Dr. Whitfield said. And Mr. Garrison, when I testify, I will be unambiguous. This was deliberate chemical assault. The line went dead. I sat at the kitchen table looking at my calendar. June 8th circled in red ink. 2 weeks away. 14 days. The machinery was running on 2 fronts simultaneously, and Stellan had no visibility into either one. Stellan had built his case on Dr. Norwood's affidavit and fabricated medical evidence. That foundation was crumbling on parallel tracks, one legal, one professional, both terminal. The clock was no longer my enemy. It was my ally. Every day that passed brought Stellan closer to overconfidence. Every buzzing phone notification convinced him I was declining faster. Every forged medical report pushed him deeper into criminal exposure. Stellan's phone kept buzzing, tracking my decline. But he didn't realize every text he sent was another nail, and I was about to hand him the hammer. Stellan kept filing his reports, tracking every lapse building, what he believed was an airtight case. Each nail he drove sealed his own coffin tighter. But I was about to drive one more nail, this one between him and Vivica. I called my daughter, Sunday morning, June 1st, 7 days before the hearing, and asked her to meet me at Boston Common at 10 o'clock alone. She arrived on time. I watched her cross the grass from Tremont Street, dressed in dark jeans and a gray sweater, despite the early summer warmth. Her posture was guarded, shoulders tight. I sat on a bench near the frog pond, morning sun, filtering through oak trees overhead. Families walked past, children chasing pigeons, couples holding coffee cups. The normal Sunday rhythm of a city at peace. Vivica sat down beside me, leaving a careful foot of distance between us. Dad, she said, what is this about? I looked at her. Really looked. 28 years old. My daughter. Constance's daughter. The child we'd raised in this city, sent to good schools, watched graduate summa cum laude from Boston College. Somewhere along the way, she'd become someone I no longer recognized. Do you know that I know? I asked. She went very still. Know what? I let the question hang between us for 10 seconds. The silence was answer enough. The pilocarpine in my eye drops, I said quietly. The AI voice recordings. The fabricated cognitive assessments. The guardianship petition designed to seize assets under false pretenses. Do you know that I know all of it? Vivica's face didn't change, but her hands tightened in her lap. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Yes, you do, I replied. But that's not why I asked you here. I extracted the folded insurance amendment from my coat pocket and placed it on the bench between us. Not as a question, as evidence. 3 months ago, I said, Stellan changed the beneficiary on your corporate life insurance policy. The primary recipient is no longer your estate. It's now Meridian Consulting, LLC, a Delaware shell company incorporated in June 2023. The true corporate controller is a third-party entity with no legal obligation to distribute funds to your heirs. I watched her eyes move to the document but not touch it. Do you understand what that means, Vivica? If you die while that policy is in force, $1.8 million flows to an entity Stellan controls. Clover receives nothing. You are worth more to him dead than alive. Her face drained of all color. Her lips formed the word, what, but no sound emerged. He executed the change using the corporate power of attorney you signed in October, I continued. The same power of attorney that gave him authority to manage all insurance and estate planning instruments. You signed it thinking it was routine paperwork. He used it to make you worth $1.8 million in death and $0 in life. Vivica stared at the document like it might detonate. This is, she started, then stopped. You're lying. No, I said calmly. I'm not. And you know I'm not. Because somewhere in the back of your mind, you've been noticing things. Small things. The way Stellan watches you when he thinks you're not looking. The way he asks about your health with questions that probe rather than comfort. The way he's been pushing you to increase your life insurance coverage over the past year. She was shaking now. Barely visible, but I'd known this woman since the day she was born. I could read every micro-expression. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. I stood slowly, buttoned my coat. "Because despite everything you've done, you're still my daughter. And your mother would have demanded I give you one last chance to save yourself." I picked up the document, returned it to my pocket. "Ask him," I said, "before the 8th. Ask him directly about Harborview Strategic LLC. Ask him why he changed your beneficiary to a shell company you've never heard of. Ask him why he's been so interested in your health lately. And watch his face when you ask." Vivica looked up at me, eyes red. "The hearing is in 7 days, I said. "I don't know which version of you will walk into that courtroom, the daughter I raised, or the woman Stellan has convinced you to become. But I do know this: if you proceed with this conspiracy, you will lose everything that matters. Not the money, not the brownstone. Everything that defines who you used to be." I turned to leave. "Dad," she said, voice breaking. We weren't trying to." I stopped, didn't turn around. "Yes," I said quietly. "You were. The pilocarpine in my eye drops wasn't an accident. The AI recordings weren't a mistake. You knew exactly what Stellan was doing. Maybe you didn't know about the life insurance. Maybe you didn't know how far he was willing to go, but you knew enough." I started walking. "The question now," I said over my shoulder, "is whether you love your daughter more than you love the money. Because Stellan has already made his choice. And if you don't ask him about that insurance policy, you'll learn his answer the hard way." I walked across the common toward Beacon Hill, past the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, past families feeding ducks at the pond, past the ordinary Sunday morning rhythm of people who weren't facing the disintegration of everything they thought they knew. Behind me, I heard her voice call out one more time, "Dad," faint, broken. The voice of someone realizing the floor beneath them was never solid. I didn't stop. In 38 years of risk assessment, I had closed 11,000 files, stamped them approved or denied, moved on to the next portfolio, the next analysis, the next calculation. This was the first time closing one felt like amputation. Some truths a person must unearth entirely on their own. I learned that from Constance. She'd kept Stellan's identity from me because she knew I needed to discover it myself, needed to see the full scope with clear eyes. Now Vivica needed the same. 7 days remained until the hearing, and I had no idea which daughter would walk into that courtroom. 7 days. That's all I had to wait to learn which version of my daughter would walk into that courtroom, if she walked in at all. The question answered itself faster than I expected, but not the way I'd hoped. Vernon's call came late. Tuesday night, June 3, his voice sharper than I had heard it in 4 months of strategy sessions. "Thaddeus," he said without preamble. "Stellan's team just dumped 3 late supplemental filings into the court registry. They're panicking." I set down the book I wasn't reading. "What did they file?" "First Marm." Vernon said, "A personal diary allegedly written by you over the past 6 months. Handwritten entries detailing mental confusion, memory lapses, fear of your own judgment. It's dated, consistent, and completely fabricated. Second, forged emails, purportedly sent from you to Vivica last year, expressing concern about your declining faculties and asking her to take over financial decisions. The metadata has been scrubbed, but our forensics team can prove they're backdated forgeries." I walked to my desk, pulled out a legal pad, began taking notes. "And third," I asked, "a signed affidavit from your neighbor at number 14. Claims to have witnessed bizarre behavior over the past year, wandering outside in pajamas, forgetting where you parked your car, asking the same questions repeatedly." I stopped writing. "Which neighbor?" "The tenant at number 14, Vernon said. A Mr. Gregory Hollins, I calculated. Number 14. The brownstone 2 doors down. The tenant had moved in 8 months ago, October 2023. 4 months before the guardianship petition was filed. Stellan had planted a witness before he ever launched the attack. They're overcompensating, I said. Vernon was quiet for a moment. That's your analysis. In risk management, I said, the loan application backed by too many guarantees is always the fraudulent one. Legitimate borrowers provide what's necessary. Fraudulent ones bury you in documentation, hoping you won't look closely at any single piece. I reviewed my notes. A fake journal. Forged emails. A bought witness. Stellan had spent months fabricating this reality, confident I had no shield to raise against it. I was wrong. Let them file it, I said. Every fabricated document is another felony count when this goes federal. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, witness tampering. They're building our prosecution case for us. The hearing is Saturday, Vernon said. 5 days. Are you ready? I looked at the calendar on my desk. June 8th circled in red. Yes, I said. I'm ready. Before I tell you what Constance wrote in that letter she left me, the one I'd carry into that courtroom. If you're still with me, comment A, if you think Vivica will show up at the hearing, or B, if you think she'll stay away, and add one reason why in 5 to 10 words. Please note the next part includes some fictionalized details added to deepen the emotional impact. The lesson is what matters. Friday night, June 7, eve of the hearing. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed in the master bedroom, the room Constance and I had shared for 32 years. The windows looked out over Beacon Hill streetlights, casting amber patterns across brick facades. I opened the safe built into the closet wall, the one only Constance and I knew the combination to. Inside, important documents, her jewelry, the deed to the brownstone, and a sealed envelope with my name in her handwriting. Vernon had delivered it to me 3 months after her funeral. She'd left it with her attorney with instructions, give it to Thaddeus if the fears I've documented come true. I'd read it once, filed it away, told myself I didn't need the comfort of words from a dead woman. I'd been wrong. I opened the envelope carefully, unfolded the single sheet of stationery, cream-colored, her monogram embossed at the top. Thaddeus, if you are reading this, it means my fears were correct. Stellan has moved against you, and Vivica has chosen to stand beside him rather than beside the truth. Do not harbor anger toward her for too long. She is not the person we hoped she would become, but she was not born malicious. She was born afraid of not measuring up, afraid of disappointing us, afraid of being ordinary. Stellan recognized that fear and weaponized it. Remember Fenway Park when she was 8? The foul ball that nearly hit her, and how you caught it bare-handed without thinking. She looked at you afterward and said, "Daddy, you'll always protect me, right?" And you said yes. You kept that promise even when she stopped deserving it. I love you. I have always loved you. And I built something that will protect you when I no longer can. Trust Vernon. Trust the numbers. Trust yourself. See, I sat there for a long time holding the letter, reading it again and again. Remember Fenway Park? I did. July 1996. Vivica was 8. Red Sox playing the Yankees. We had seats along the first baseline. A foul ball screamed toward us, and I caught it without thinking, my hand stinging for an hour afterward. Vivica had looked at me with absolute faith. "Daddy, you'll always protect me, right?" "Always," I'd said. 28 years later, I was still keeping that promise. Even though protection now meant letting her face consequences. Even though it meant watching her choose wrong and refusing to intervene. Because that's what Constance understood, that I hadn't. Sometimes protection means allowing someone to hit bottom so they can learn to stand on their own. I folded the letter carefully and walked to the closet. The dark suit hung there, pressed and ready, the same suit I'd worn to Constance's funeral. the same suit I'd wear tomorrow. I slipped the letter into the breast pocket, felt it rest against my heart. Not for courage. I simply wanted Constance in that courtroom with me. I looked at the clock. 1:17 a.m., Saturday morning, June 8th. In less than 9 hours, I would walk into Suffolk County Probate Court. Vernon would sit beside me. Stellan would present his fabricated evidence. The judge would ask if I contested, and I would say no. I would sign the guardianship decree. Let them believe they'd won. Let Stellan feel the rush of victory. Let him make that first move to liquidate the trust. Let him wire the funds. And then Constance's trap, 16 months in the making, would close. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock, the gavel would fall. And every calculation I had made over 4 months would either hold or collapse. But I had done the math, and the numbers never lied. The numbers never lied. Saturday morning would prove whether my calculations held or whether I'd miscalculated the most important equation of my life. The bailiff's voice cut through the silence like a blade through still water. All rise for the Honorable Judge Carolyn Merrick. I stood. Vernon stood beside me, briefcase at his feet, expression professionally neutral. Across the aisle, Vivica and Stellan rose from their seats. Vivica's hands were clasped tight. Stellan's posture radiated confidence. Judge Carolyn Merrick entered mid-50s, silver-streaked hair, pulled back in a tight bun, black robe crisp as her diction. 22 years on the bench had given her the ability to assess credibility in the first 30 seconds of testimony. I'd researched her thoroughly. Fair, procedural, unmovable once she'd made a determination. "Be seated," she said. We sat. The courtroom was small Suffolk County Probate Court, third-floor wood paneling that absorbed sound and made every word feel weighted. A handful of observers sat in the gallery. Court reporter at her station. No jury, just facts, law, and a gavel. "In re-guardianship of Thaddeus Garrison," Judge Merrick said, reading from the docket. "Petitioners Vivica Ann Garrison and Stellan James Prescott, seeking appointment as co-guardians of person and estate. Counsel proceed." Stellan's attorney rose, a man I didn't recognize, likely hired specifically for this proceeding. He carried himself with the smooth confidence of someone who believed the outcome was predetermined. "Your Honor," he began, "the evidence will demonstrate that Mr. Garrison is suffering from progressive cognitive decline and visual impairment that render him unable to manage his financial affairs or make sound decisions regarding his care." He gestured to a stack of exhibits on the table. Exhibit A, psychiatric evaluation by Dr. Kingsley Norwood, certifying moderate to severe cognitive impairment, consistent with early-stage dementia. I watched the judge scan the document. Dr. Norwood's fraudulent signature, his fabricated assessment, his cash-paid diagnosis. Exhibit B, audio recordings of phone conversations, wherein Mr. Garrison exhibits significant confusion, memory loss, and inability to recall basic information. The attorney played a 30-second clip. My voice, or rather the AI-synthesized approximation of my voice, saying, "I can't remember where I put the checkbook. I think I already paid that bill. Or did I? I'm so tired of not being able to think clearly." I recognized the synthetic artifacts immediately. The slight digital smoothing on sibilants, the unnatural cadence. But to an untrained ear, it was convincing. Exhibit C, personal journal entries written by Mr. Garrison over the past 6 months, documenting his own awareness of declining faculties. How many hours had they spent studying my handwriting? How many samples had Stellan photographed during visits to my home? How much had he paid for a forgery this convincing? And Exhibit D, sworn affidavit from Mr. Gregory Hollins, Mr. Garrison's neighbor at number 14 Beacon Hill Avenue, detailing observed erratic behavior, including wandering outside in night clothes, forgetting where he parked his vehicle, and asking the same questions repeatedly. Gregory Hollins, the tenant who'd moved in 8 months ago, the planted witness. Judge Merrick reviewed each exhibit methodically. Then she turned to Vernon. Counsel for the respondent, do you wish to cross-examine or present rebuttal evidence? Vernon glanced at me. I gave one subtle nod. No rebuttal, Your Honor, Vernon said. A ripple of surprise moved through the courtroom. Stellan's attorney's eyebrows lifted slightly. Vivica's head turned toward Stellan, confusion crossing her face. Judge Merrick's expression didn't change, but I saw her eyes sharpen. Mr. Garrison, she said, addressing me directly. Do you understand the nature of these proceedings? Yes, Your Honor, I said. And do you contest the findings presented by the petitioners? The courtroom went silent. Vivica leaned forward slightly. Stellan's hand tightened on the armrest, knuckles white. I thought of Constance in the hospital 3 days before she died. Her hand squeezing mine despite the weakness, her voice barely audible. Promise me you'll let them think they've won before you strike. Promise me. I promised, I'd whispered. Then keep it, she'd said. I stood slowly, met Judge Merrick's eyes. I do not contest, I said clearly. I am prepared to sign today. Vivica's eyes widened. Stellan's mouth opened slightly in disbelief, then closed into a smile. Vernon slid the guardianship decree across the table to me. I picked up the pen, the same pen I'd used to sign 11,000 credit assessments over 38 years. My hand was steady, no tremor, no hesitation. I signed my name, Thaddeus Garrison. The signature was clear, controlled, perfectly formed. The signature of a man in complete command of his faculties, surrendering anyway. Judge Merrick reviewed the signed decree. Guardianship is hereby granted to Vivica Ann Garrison and Stellan James Prescott, effective immediately, she said. All financial accounts, real property, and estate instruments shall be transferred to guardianship control within 10 business days. This court retains jurisdiction for annual review. The gavel struck. Final. Irreversible. Stellan smiled like an eager borrower who'd just signed a loan agreement without reading the default clauses. We stood. Vernon gathered his papers in silence. Vivica wouldn't look at me. Stellan shook his attorney's hand, then turned to me. In the hallway outside the courtroom, he clapped me on the shoulder. We'll take good care of you, Thaddeus, he said. This is for the best. You'll see. Vivica stood 3 feet away, staring at the floor. Vernon carried the signed decree, his expression revealing nothing. We walked toward the elevator. Down to the first floor. Out onto Cambridge Street. Morning sun, late spring warmth, the city moving at its usual Saturday rhythm. I checked my watch. 10:79 a.m. At 9. This morning, Vernon had delivered formal written notice of Ashford and Monroe's perfected security interest to State Street Bank's legal department, as required under UCC Article 9 enforcement procedure. The bank was now on notice. Any attempt to transfer collateral assets would require their compliance with the prior lien. Stellan had won the battle. He had no idea the bank already knew the war was over. 43 minutes had stretched into 5 business days. 5 days of Stellan believing he'd 5 days of waiting for the clerk's office to process the letters of appointment that would grant him access to everything. 5 days for the trap to set perfectly. Friday morning, June 15. State Street Bank, 3rd floor private client office. Vivica signed the wire authorization with the confidence of someone who had never read the footnotes in a securities filing. I sat in the corner chair, hands folded in my lap, watching. Vernon had insisted I attend. You need to be present, he'd said. Not to speak, just to witness. So I witnessed. Gregory Finch sat across the desk from Vivica and Stellan, mid-40s, rimless glasses, State Street Bank, nameplate, polished to a mirror shine. 15 years in private wealth management had taught him that the quietest clients often held the sharpest knives. He reviewed the letters of appointment with methodical precision. Everything appears to be in order, Gregory said. The court decree is properly executed. The letters are certified by Suffolk County Probate Court, and the account access authorization is valid. Stellan leaned forward slightly. How quickly can we initiate the transfer? Once you provide the wire instructions, Gregory said, the transaction will process within the hour, assuming all compliance checks clear. Stellan slid a handwritten note across the desk. $2 million. Split between these two accounts. $1 million to clear the business liens at Commerce Bank, $1 million to Hollister Realty as down payment for the Chestnut Hill property. Gregory typed the instructions into his system. I watched the screen from my angle transaction amount, receiving institutions' account numbers. Everything Stellan had been planning for 18 months, reduced to lines of code and routing numbers. Wire authorization requires both guardians' signatures, Gregory said, turning a document toward Vivica. She signed without reading it. Her hand moved across the page with the smooth confidence of someone who believed the outcome was inevitable. How many hours had Constance spent modeling clerk processing times, cross-referencing Massachusetts UCC, filing deadlines, calculating the exact window when Stellan would feel safe enough to move the money. Every variable accounted for, every timeline calculated, every trap mechanism tested against 38 years of financial systems knowledge. Processing now, Gregory said, hitting enter. The screen showed wire transfer initiated. Compliance review in progress. Stellan sat back, exhaled. Vivica's shoulders relaxed for the first time in 5 days. I checked my watch. 9:47 a.m. Gregory's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, frowned slightly, and answered. Yes, a pause. I see, hold on. He typed rapidly, pulled up a different screen. His expression shifted from professional neutrality to visible confusion. Mr. Prescott, Gregory said carefully, I'm seeing a notification I need to verify. What kind of notification? Stellan asked. There appears to be a UCC-1 financing statement on file with the Massachusetts Secretary of State. A perfected security interest covering the assets in this trust account. Stellan's face went very still. What does that mean? It means, Gregory said, typing more commands, that a secured creditor has priority claim on these assets. The wire transfer is being flagged for review. Gregory's screen showed transfer blocked, prior lien notification on file. Legal hold active. Mr. Prescott, Gregory said carefully, we received formal notice yesterday from Ashford and Monroe LLP documenting a perfected UCC Article 9 security interest on these assets filed April 2022. Our legal department placed a hold this morning. I cannot process this transfer while a prior secured party's written notice is on file. I watched Stellan's face drain from flush confidence to ash-white panic in the span of 3 seconds. It was the exact expression a man makes when he realizes he's been playing checkers against a chess master who died 2 years ago. That's impossible, Stellan said. There's no lien on this account. I checked. I had attorneys check. The UCC-1 filing is dated April 14, 2022, Gregory said, reading from his screen. Secured party Ashford and Monroe LLP. Debtor Thaddeus Garrison. Collateral description includes this trust account by specific identifier. Stellan pulled out his phone with shaking hands. Dialed. Waited. Harrison, he said when someone answered or didn't answer, because I heard the click of voicemail. Harrison, call me immediately. We have a problem. He dialed again. This time the phone rang only once before being answered. Vernon Ashford, came the voice through Stellan's phone, clear enough for all of us to hear. Vernon. Stellan set his voice tight. There's some kind of error with the trust account. A UCC filing that's blocking the transfer. You need to... I've been expecting your call, Stellan, Vernon said calmly. Did the wire not go through? Stellan's hand trembled. You knew about this. I executed the UCC-1 financing statement personally, Vernon said. On Constance's explicit instructions, April 14, 2022, 26 months ago, she knew you'd come for the money. She just needed you to try. This is fraud, Stellan said. This is a perfected security interest under Massachusetts UCC Article 9, Vernon interrupted. Properly filed, publicly recorded first priority claim. Any attempt to transfer collateral subject to a perfected security interest triggers automatic enforcement, which is exactly what just happened. Stellan looked at Vivica. Vivica looked at the bank manager's screen where red text still flashed. Then she looked at me sitting quietly in the corner chair. I met her eyes, said nothing. The filing, Stellan said into the phone, his voice barely controlled. When was it executed? April 2022, Vernon said. 7 months before Constance passed. She came to my office, retained independent counsel, and created a security agreement specifically designed to prevent exactly what you attempted today. But the guardianship gives you authority to manage the assets, Vernon said. Not to liquidate them, not to transfer them, not to encumber them beyond the existing security interest. You have guardianship. Constance has the lien, and a lien always wins. Stellan lowered the phone slowly. Gregory Finch sat very still, hands folded on his desk, clearly calculating whether this conversation required legal department involvement. Vivica's face had gone pale. She looked at her husband, then at the screen, then at me. For the first time in 5 days, perhaps, for the first time in 4 years, she understood what surrender actually looked like. It wasn't signing papers in a courtroom. It was watching your victory dissolve 47 minutes after you thought you'd won. Vivica had watched her victory dissolve in 47 minutes. Stellan took 8 hours to realize his last option was extortion. The thumb drive hit the mahogany table with the sound of a man burning his last bridge. I had expected him to wait to consult Harrison, to construct a measured response through attorneys. But Harrison Prescott's phone had been going to voicemail since 2 o'clock, according to Agent Fletcher's surveillance update. Whatever the two men had built together was fracturing, and Stellan was discovering the particular terror of a man who has spent 18 months constructing a fortress, only to find at the moment of crisis that he is entirely alone inside it. 8 p.m. I sat in the first-floor living room reading a book I wasn't processing when I heard his car pull into the driveway. I'd been expecting him. Not immediately. Desperation takes time to calcify into recklessness. I picked up my phone, dialed Vivica. She answered on the second ring. "Dad, don't speak," I said quietly. "Just listen. Stellan is about to arrive at my door. I'm going to put you on speaker and set the phone on the table. Whatever you hear, don't hang up. Don't say anything unless I ask you a direct question. Do you understand?" A pause. Then yes. I placed the phone face down on the side table screen showing the active call. Then I walked to the door and opened it before Stellan could knock. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. Tie loosened, shirt wrinkled, hair disheveled. The composed attorney I'd watched across courtrooms and dinner tables had been replaced by something feral. "We need to talk," he said. "Come in," I replied. He walked past me into the living room. Didn't sit. Pulled a thumb drive from his pocket and slammed it onto the coffee table. "That drive," he said, voice tight, "has everything. Vivica's fingerprints on the original eye drop bottle from your bathroom. Forged signatures on the trust amendments. Her signatures, not mine. Bank transfer records showing money moved from her personal accounts to pay off the people I hired. Every piece of evidence the FBI will need to charge her with murder and fraud." I looked at the thumb drive, then at Stellan. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're going to call Vernon," Stellan said, "and you're going to tell him to release the UCC lien immediately. Or I send this to the FBI and the Boston Globe. Your daughter goes to prison for murdering Constance." I sat down slowly in the armchair, folded my hands. "You manufactured evidence to frame your own wife for murder," I said. "I protected myself," Stellan corrected. "If this goes federal, if they start investigating the guardianship, the bank fraud, Harrison's involvement, I need leverage. Vivica is that leverage. She was always going to be collateral." How long had he been planning this, manufacturing fingerprints? forging bank records, building a file thick enough to send his wife to prison for a crime he knew she didn't commit. How long had she been not his partner, not even his co-conspirator, but his exit strategy? She doesn't know about this, I said. Not a question. Of course not, Stellan said. She's useful as long as she believes I'm protecting her. The moment she realizes what I'm willing to do, she becomes a liability. I took a step closer. So here's what happens. You call Vernon right now. You tell him to release the lien and walk away. I get the trust funds. You get to keep your daughter out of prison. Everyone wins. And if I refuse, then tomorrow morning the FBI gets an anonymous package containing that thumb drive. By tomorrow night, Vivica is arrested for murder. And you get to spend the rest of your life knowing you could have saved her and chose not to. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I gestured to the side table. You should know, I said calmly, that Vivica has been listening to this entire conversation. I called her when you pulled into the driveway 47 minutes ago. The phone has been on speaker the whole time. Stellan's face drained of all color. He turned to look at the phone lying face down on the table, the screen glowing faintly beneath. I reached over and flipped it face up. The call timer read 47:22, 47:23, 47:24. Vivica. Stellan said, his voice suddenly different. This isn't, I was just... The speaker crackled. Then her voice came through, barely audible, hollow, distant. Stellan, just his name. Nothing more. But it carried the weight of a marriage dissolving in real time, 4 years of trust atomizing into a single hollow syllable. The line went dead. Stellan stared at the phone screen. Then at me. Then at the thumb drive still sitting on the table, his last weapon, his insurance policy, now evidence of attempted extortion and conspiracy to obstruct justice. She won't, he started. She already has, I said. The moment you threatened to frame her for murder, you lost the only person who might have stood by you. Stellan's hands were shaking. He reached for the thumb drive. Don't, I said. It's evidence now. The FBI will want it intact. The FBI isn't coming, Stellan said, but his voice lacked conviction. I stood slowly, walked to the window. Through the glass, I saw headlights turn onto the street. 2 vehicles, unmarked but unmistakable. Agent Fletcher, I said, has been waiting for this call since Tuesday. I contacted him 3 days ago and explained that you would likely attempt extortion once the UCC lien froze your access. He asked me to record any such attempt. I told him a phone call to Vivica would be simpler. He agreed. The vehicles pulled to the curb in front of the brownstone. The recording, Stellan said, his voice cracking. That's inadmissible. Massachusetts requires all-party consent. You're correct that Massachusetts is an all-party consent state, I said, which is why I didn't record you. Agent Fletcher had a federal wiretap warrant in place before you walked through that door, authorized 3 days ago, the moment I reported your extortion attempt in advance. Federal jurisdiction supersedes the state statute. Every word you said tonight was captured under lawful federal authority. I watched him do the calculation. His mouth closed. Doors opened on both vehicles outside. 4 men stepped out. The thumb drive, I said, contains fabricated evidence you just admitted was manufactured to frame your wife for murder. That's attempted obstruction of justice. The extortion attempt, threatening to send false evidence to law enforcement unless I comply with your demands. That's multiple felonies. Wire fraud, conspiracy. And now the FBI has everything they need. Footsteps on the front walk. Stellan looked at the door. At me. At the thumb drive. You planned all of this, he said. No, I replied. Constance did. I'm just executing her will. The doorbell rang. I walked to the door. It's time. It was time. I opened the door. Agent Fletcher reads Stellan his Miranda rights in the same flat tone he might have used to read a grocery list. Stellan James Prescott, you are under arrest for wire fraud, in violation of Title 18 United States Code Section. Aggravated identity theft, in violation of Section 28A, conspiracy to commit fraud and forgery of legal instruments. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Fletcher had pre-approved federal warrants ready since Tuesday. I'd been coordinating with him for 3 days, feeding him documentation, preparing for exactly this moment. The extortion attempt was just the final piece, the act of desperation that would seal every charge. Stellan stood frozen in my living room, hands at his sides. 2 other agents moved past me, one securing the thumb drive from the coffee table, with gloved hands bagging it as evidence. "This is a mistake," Stellan said, looking at me as they cuffed his hands behind his back. "Thaddeus, tell them." "The mistake," I said quietly from the doorway, was thinking Constance wouldn't plan for this. They led him out. Down the front steps, across the brick sidewalk, into a black SUV with federal plates. Red and blue lights from unmarked vehicles painted the brownstone facades up and down Beacon Hill. Agent Fletcher stayed behind for a moment. "The second team is executing the warrant on your daughter's apartment right now," he said. "Back Bay, Marlborough Street. She'll be processed at Suffolk County, arraigned tomorrow morning." "What are the charges?" I asked. "Conspiracy to commit fraud. We'll determine the extent of her involvement during interrogation. The evidence suggests she was aware of the pilocarpine substitution and the fabricated medical records, but the degree of her participation is still under investigation." I nodded. "Her daughter," I said. "Clover, 7 years old. I need to pick her up tonight before she wakes up to police at the door." Fletcher pulled out a card, wrote something on the back. "Give this to the officers at the scene. They'll release the child into your custody. You're the maternal grandfather." "Yes, that's sufficient. We'll note it in the report." He left. I stood on the front steps, watching the vehicles pull away. 11 p.m. The street was quiet again, as if nothing had happened. As if my son-in-law hadn't just been arrested for federal crimes in my living room. As if my daughter wasn't being cuffed in her apartment 10 blocks away. Is this justice or just the mechanics of consequence? Watching your son-in-law led away in handcuffs while your granddaughter sleeps in an apartment that's about to be swarmed by federal agents. Watching your daughter face charges because she chose the wrong partner and followed him into conspiracy. I drove to Back Bay. Showed Fletcher's card to the officer at Vivica's door. Carried Clover, still asleep, wrapped in a purple blanket, down to my car and drove her back to Beacon Hill. She didn't wake up. I laid her in Constance's old sewing room, the room with the window seat and the bookshelf full of children's books Constance had saved. Pulled the blanket up to her chin. Turned on the small nightlight. Then I went downstairs and waited. Saturday morning, 6:12 a.m. My phone rang. "This is a collect call from Suffolk County Jail. Will you accept charges?" "Yes." A click. Then Vivica's voice, flat and exhausted. "Where is Clover?" "Upstairs," I said. "In your grandmother's old sewing room. I picked her up from your apartment at midnight. She's still asleep." A long pause. I heard her breathing, heard the echo of the jail phone system. "Thank you," she whispered. We sat in silence for 10 seconds, 20. "When did you know?" she asked finally. "The eye drops," I said. 3 months before your mother died. I found the original bottle in this bathroom trash. Stellan had been careless. The pharmacy label didn't match the liquid inside. I had it tested. 3 months, Vivica repeated. "You knew for 3 months and you didn't." "I didn't tell your mother," I said. "She was dying. She had 6 weeks left. I wasn't going to spend her final days forcing her to face what you'd become." Another silence. "I'm sorry," Vivica said. Her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I never wanted—" "You need a defense attorney," I interrupted. "Not an apology. I am retaining independent counsel for you. Vernon is coordinating with a firm that specializes in federal conspiracy cases. They'll contact you within the hour. Why? The word came out strangled, disbelieving. Vivica's voice cracked on that single syllable. 4 letters carrying the weight of a daughter who had just realized her father would save her even after she tried to destroy him. Because your mother would have demanded it, I said. Because you're still my daughter. Because Clover needs her mother even if that mother made catastrophic choices. And because Constance told me 2 months before she died not to harbor anger toward you for too long. I heard her sob, once sharp, quickly suppressed. The attorney will explain your options, I continued. Cooperation with the prosecution will reduce your sentence significantly. Stellan is going to prison for a long time. Harrison Prescott is facing disbarment and federal charges. You have the opportunity to separate yourself from their conspiracy. I don't deserve this, Vivica whispered. No. I agreed. You don't. But Clover deserves a mother who comes home eventually. So you'll take the attorney. You'll cooperate. And you'll do the work to become the person you were before Stellan convinced you money mattered more than family. The line went quiet. I have to go, she said finally. Time's up. I'll bring Clover to visitation when they allow it, I said. The call disconnected. I sat at my desk phone still in my hand. On the shelf across from me sat a framed photograph, Constance Vivica at age 12, and me at a Cape Cod beach, summer 1998. Vivica was laughing sand on her feet, Constance's hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. I spoke to the photograph, voice steady. I kept my promise. She has counsel. Clover is safe. And Stellan will answer for what he did to our family. Upstairs, a small voice called out, Grandpa. The photograph agent Fletcher sent to my phone was dated April 17, 1993, 11 years before Stellan was born. Clover had called my name from upstairs that night in June, the night after the arrests, and I'd found her sitting cross-legged on the guest room bed surrounded by her sketchbooks. Did you keep your promise to Grandma? She'd asked. I'd told her yes, and she'd nodded once, satisfied, before showing me the charcoal portrait she'd been working on Constance's face, rendered in precise, loving detail. Now 2 weeks later, I stood in my study holding evidence that rewrote everything I thought I understood. Agent Fletcher's voice on the phone was measured professional. The safe contained a 1993 photograph and what appears to be your father-in-law's private investigation file on you. Bank statements, surveillance photos, property records, all dated March through November 2019. I sank into the leather chair by the window. He met Vivica in May 2020. Exactly, Fletcher said. He found her first, then engineered the meeting. The photograph showed a young woman in her early 20s, dark hair, standing outside what looked like a Providence coffee shop. The handwriting scrawled across the back was manic uneven. The woman I lost to Raymond Cole. The ink had faded to brown, but the obsession remained fresh. Who's Raymond Cole? I asked. We're still working on that, Fletcher said. But the dossier on you is comprehensive. Stellan or whoever compiled it knew your banking patterns, your morning routes, your property valuations, even the restaurants you frequented. There are surveillance photographs of you entering Mass General, leaving your office, walking on the Common. All time-stamped between March and November 2019, 14 months before Stellan's first date with Vivica. 14 months of watching, planning, constructing the perfect approach. The meeting at the Museum of Fine Arts Sculpture Garden hadn't been chance, it had been choreographed. Thomas Vickers was Stellan's biological father, Fletcher continued. The photo suggests an old obsession possibly transferred to the son. Horror replaced the anger I'd carried for months. Vivica hadn't been complicit. She'd been hunted. I thought of the pharmacy receipt, the pilocarpine drops, the fabricated journal entries. I'd believed she'd known that she'd chosen this path alongside Stellan. But if he'd been tracking me for over a year before they met, if he'd selected her specifically because of her proximity to me, she was the access point, I said quietly. How many hours had Stellan spent watching Vivica from across coffee shops and subway platforms before he accidentally bumped into her at the MFA Sculpture Garden? How many months did he rehearse? Spontaneity, perfecting the smile, the casual opening line, the impression of serendipity. The evidence changes her culpability profile, Fletcher said. The U.S. attorney is reviewing the charges in light of this. She may qualify for victim status under the coercion statutes. The call ended. I forwarded the photograph to Vernon with a single line. The trap went deeper than we knew. 3 months passed in depositions, forensic accounting reviews, and federal plea negotiations. September arrived with crisp air and the weight of closure. The federal district courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, wood-paneled and severe. I sat in the gallery beside Vernon. Vivica sat at the defendant's table with her attorney's shoulders, straight hands folded. Stellan sat 20 feet away, separately represented his expression, blank. Judge Hartley entered early 60s, steel-gray hair, federal bench, 23 years. He'd sentenced white-collar criminals long enough to recognize the difference between greed and pathology. The charges were read. Stellan pled guilty to wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to defraud, and RICO violations. Harrison Prescott, seated in the row behind Stellan, received his sentence first. Disbarred 4 years federal incarceration. Dr. Norwood's medical license had already been permanently revoked. He sat pale and diminished in the back row. Judge Hartley turned to Stellan. Mr. Prescott, you orchestrated a multi-year conspiracy to defraud your wife's family through identity theft, forgery, and wire fraud. You exploited familial bonds and manipulated legal structures designed to protect the vulnerable. 9 years federal incarceration. Stellan's face didn't change. He'd known the number before entering the room. Then the judge addressed Vivica. Ms. Garrison, the 2019 surveillance evidence demonstrates you were targeted before you knew this man existed. 2 years incarceration, 3 years supervised probation, full restitution to the trust. Vivica's face when the judge said, targeted before you knew this man existed. Recognition and relief and grief colliding in a single sharp inhale. The sound of a woman learning her 4-year marriage was a calculated hunt. Judge Hartley leaned forward. This court recognizes the predatory exploitation of familial bonds. Miss Garrison, you were a victim before you became a participant. That distinction matters. Stellan was given the opportunity for a final statement. He stood slowly, buttoned his suit jacket, and looked directly at me for the first time since the hearing began. My father taught me that some debts outlive the people who owe them, he said. Judge Hartley's expression hardened. And this court teaches that crimes outlive the grudges that spawn them. The gavel fell. Marshals led Stellan away in handcuffs. Vivica signed the restitution agreement with Vernon, witnessing her signature shaky but legible. I watched from the gallery, feeling nothing resembling satisfaction, only the hollow completion of a terrible equation. Agent Fletcher approached as the courtroom emptied. He handed me a sealed evidence envelope, manila and worn. The label read, Thomas Vickers, 1993 Providence investigation, unsolved. Thomas Vickers had an obsession with a woman he'd met briefly in Providence in 1993, your wife. We found 47 photographs of her in his personal effects, taken without her knowledge over 6 months before his bankruptcy. He appears to have found out her name through the Federal Reserve loan application. Your name was on the denial letter, which gave him your employer and eventually your home address. Fletcher paused. He raised his son on that story. The woman he'd lost. The man who took everything. Stellan inherited the vendetta intact. And Constance knew, I asked. She filed a restraining order in April 1993, Providence District Court, Thomas Vickers case 93 CV 1847. It was never served because he'd already moved. She told no one, including you, because by the time she married you, she believed it was over. She had no way to know the vendetta would be passed down. The envelope felt heavy in my hands. Outside, September sun filtered through courthouse windows. Justice had been served, sentences pronounced, the conspiracy dismantled. But the vendetta's origin, the woman in the photograph, the man named Raymond Cole, the obsession Constance had carried silently for 30 years, waited inside the envelope, ready to rewrite every memory I thought I understood. The first thing I saw after the bandages came off was the October light filtering through the brownstone's wavy glass panes, imperfect, beautiful, clear. The 1993 investigation file had remained sealed on my desk for 3 weeks. I'd read the case summary, Thomas Vickers's obsession with a woman who'd chosen another man, the escalating surveillance, the Providence Police Department's inability to prosecute without a victim willing to testify. Constance had refused. She'd married me instead, built a life deliberately separate from his obsession, and constructed legal protections I was only now beginning to fully comprehend. Some mysteries didn't need solving. Some ghosts were better left unexhumed. Dr. Whitfield had removed the surgical bandages that morning, steady hands unwrapping gauze while I sat motionless in the master bedroom chair. The retinal procedure had taken 2 hours in late August, a laser treatment to address the residual damage from 4 months of unintended pilocarpine exposure. Recovery had required 6 weeks of reduced light medicated drops, and the particular discipline of trusting a process I could not directly observe. Open slowly, he'd said. I did. October sunlight struck the room's Persian rug, illuminating dust motes suspended in air, the grain of the oak nightstand, the framed photograph of Constance on the dresser, her face no longer a blur, but precisely rendered, every detail sharp. The bedroom door burst open. Clover ran in, 7 years old and breathless. "Grandpa, can you see me? Can you really see me now?" I turned toward her voice and saw her completely for the first time since June of the previous year, dark curls like Constance's, Vivica's narrow chin eyes that held neither parent's damage, only curiosity and hope. I knelt without thinking, without analyzing the risk of sudden movement, or calculating the appropriate emotional distance to maintain. I pulled her into an embrace and held on. "I can see you perfectly, sweetie," I said. "You have your grandmother's eyes." She wrapped her arms around my neck, and for 10 seconds the world contained nothing but this connection, without armor, without the protective analysis that had defined every interaction since Constance died. Dr. Whitfield gathered his medical bag quietly and let himself out. Clover pulled back slightly, her expression shifting. "When is Mommy coming home?" The question arrived without warning, as children's questions do. Vivica had been sentenced to 24 months. We were 4 months in. "2 more years, sweetie," I said. "Until then, you're stuck with me." She considered this, nodded once, and kissed my cheek before running back downstairs to her sketchbooks. I stood slowly alone in the room, seeing clearly for the first time in 18 months, and understanding finally that some forms of blindness had nothing to do with corneas. 3 weeks later, I met Renee at a small cafe on Massachusetts Avenue in Cambridge. She'd called this previous evening, said she was relocating to Maine, asked if I'd meet her before she left. She arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, carrying a large padded envelope. She looked older than I remembered. Grief had carved lines around her mouth that hadn't been there in June. She slid the envelope across the table with hands that trembled slightly. This woman who'd raised the son who tried to destroy me now delivered the wife's message that proved she'd known I'd survive him. "Constance gave this to me in 2021, Renee said quietly. "She said to deliver it only if you survived what was coming." I didn't understand then. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a framed photograph, our 1996 wedding portrait, the original I'd believed destroyed in the 2018 basement flood. Behind the frame, backing tucked against the cardboard, was a card in Constance's handwriting I knew you'd be okay. Always yours, C. 3 years before she died, she'd been planning my recovery. She knew, I said. Not the details, Renee said. But she knew Thomas's son existed, knew he might come eventually. She prepared what she could. The trust structure, the UCC mechanism, the evidence trails. Vernon told me it was all designed years in advance. I looked at the photograph. Constance in ivory silk, 28 years old, smiling at a future she'd already begun protecting. The message wasn't prophecy. It was faith. You have balanced your ledger, Renee, I said. Go to Maine. Start again. She nodded once, stood, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. The following Thursday, I sat in the conference room at Ashford and Monroe, while Vernon laid out the final accounting. The UCC lien had been dissolved. The trust was whole. 4 million principal, Vernon said, sliding the summary across the mahogany table. 340,000 in court-ordered restitution. Accrued interest over 22 months. Total recovered assets 4.47 million. Sophia sat to my left, notary seal ready. I want 3 allocations, I said. 40% to establish the Thaddeus Garrison Vision Research Endowment at Mass General. 30% to an irrevocable trust for Clover, inaccessible until she turns 25. 30% sent to my consolidated retirement accounts. Vernon wrote quickly, translated intent into legal language, printed the documents. The trust papers lay in 3 neat stacks on the table: 40% memory, 30% future, 30% present. Capital finally served the purpose. Mathematics was invented for measuring what matters. Sophia reviewed each page, applied her seal, signed as witness. Sole beneficiary on everything, she asked. Clover, I said. If I've learned anything, it's that legacy is who you protect, not what you protect. Vernon witnessed the final signatures. Sophia handed me the notarized documents, and I placed them carefully in my briefcase. 18 months of warfare, reduced to 42 pages of trusts, endowments, and estate provisions. Vernon stood to leave, then paused at the conference room door. Constance would be proud, Thaddeus. Not of the victory, of what you built from it. I walked out onto Tremont Street 20 minutes later. November wind cut sharp against my face, carrying the smell of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor and the diesel exhaust of passing buses. The city moved around me, strangers with their own equations, their own survival calculations, their own invisible wars. For the first time in 22 months, I turned toward home instead of looking over my shoulder. Vivica looked smaller in the orange jumpsuit, but her posture, shoulders back, chin level, carried the geometry of someone learning to stand without leaning on lies. Home had meant walking through the front door without calculating exit routes, sleeping without waking at every sound, seeing Clover's face across the breakfast table, and feeling something other than tactical responsibility. 3 weeks after the estate restructuring, I'd stopped checking locks twice. 2 weeks after that, I'd deleted the security camera feeds from my phone. By December, home meant what it was supposed to mean: the place you return to because you want to, not because you're defending it. The MCI Framingham visitation room smelled of industrial cleaner and burnt coffee. Vivica sat across the scarred metal table, 6 months into her sentence, and I barely recognized the woman who'd signed fraudulent guardianship papers in June. They have me working in the facility accounting office, she said. Reconciling commissary transactions, tracking inmate trust accounts. It's strange, I spent 4 years married to a man planning my father's destruction, but I never balanced a checkbook. Now I reconcile ledgers every day. She looked grounded in ways she never had outside these walls. The designer clothes, the Beacon Hill social circuit, the performance of being Stellan Prescott's wife. All of it had been costume. This version stripped to orange cotton, and honesty felt more substantial. Clover asks about you, I said. I told her you're working on a special project that requires you to be away for a while. Does she believe that? She's 8, I said. She believes what makes sense to her. Right now, that's enough. Viveka's hands rested flat on the table. No rings, no jewelry. Mom knew, didn't she, about Thomas Vickers, about the vendetta Stellan inherited. She built the trust structure knowing someone might come eventually. The 1993 investigation file suggests she did, I said. She refused to testify against her brother, married me instead, constructed legal protections decades in advance. I'm still trying to understand how much she knew versus how much she feared. You could spot a 3% portfolio drift from 30 pages away, Viveka said quietly. But you couldn't see your own daughter was drowning. The observation landed like an auditor's footnote, precise, undeniable, devastating. I audited your portfolio accurately, I said. I simply didn't want to believe the metrics. That was analyst error, not instrument failure. Her voice cracked when she asked the next question. And in that fracture, I heard the daughter I'd raised before Stellan rewrote her source code. The girl who once asked me to explain compound interest using her piggy bank savings. When will you forgive me? I looked at her across the table. My daughter, my betrayer, my responsibility, my failure. I am sitting across from you, I said. That is the first line of the ledger. She nodded once, understanding that forgiveness wasn't a transaction, but an accounting practice. You record the debt, acknowledge the balance, and carry it forward without letting it compound. A week later, Clover sat at the kitchen table, eating cereal, legs swinging above the floor, ponytail slightly crooked. Because I still hadn't mastered the elastic band tension Constance had executed perfectly. What did you do before you retired, Grandpa? She asked between spoonfuls. I assessed risk, I said, pouring coffee. Looked at companies and people to determine if they were safe investments. Like a detective, like an accountant detective, I said. I reviewed financial records, interviewed management, calculated probability of success or failure. She considered this with the absolute seriousness only 8-year-olds can muster. Did you assess Daddy? The question arrived without warning, delivered in the same tone she used to ask about weather or homework. Yes, I said. What category? Extreme risk, I said. Category 5. She nodded, spooned more cereal, then looked up with Constance's eyes, dark, intelligent, merciless in their clarity. Next time you should issue your field report sooner, Grandpa. I smiled despite myself. Agreed, partner. Lesson learned. She finished breakfast, grabbed her backpack, and ran for the school bus, idling at the corner. I watched through the kitchen window as she climbed aboard, waved once, disappeared into the vehicle's interior. Then I walked to the front steps, carried my coffee outside, and sat exactly where Constance had sat every morning for 32 years. December sun angled through bare maple branches, warming the old brick with light that held no heat. My restored vision captured every architectural detail with painful clarity. The mortar lines between bricks, the iron railings' rust spots, the slight settling crack running along the brownstone's left corner that had been there since we bought the place in 1992. Constance's note rested in my breast pocket, words memorized, but presence necessary. I knew you'd be okay. She'd known because she'd made sure of it. The trust structure, the UCC filing mechanism, the evidence trails. Vernon could follow the wedding portrait delivered through Renee, all of it designed years before the threat materialized. She'd audited the future and left me the documentation I'd need to survive it. I never asked why she sat here every morning. Now I understand. She'd been seeing what was worth protecting. Park Street church bells began their 8 o'clock chime sound, carrying across Beacon Hill with the clarity of certainty. A neighbor, Mrs. Holloway from number 18, waved from across the street. I waved back without hesitation, without analysis. The procedure had given me 20/20 vision, but sitting on these steps with Constance's note in my pocket and Clover's wisdom ringing in my ears, I finally understood the difference between seeing and clarity. One measures light, the other measures truth. Stellan would serve 9 years. Vivica would serve 2, then return to a daughter who'd grown up knowing her father was in prison, and her mother had been complicit in hunting her grandfather. The Thaddeus Garrison Vision Research Endowment would fund corneal transplant research at Mass General. Clover's trust would grow for 17 years until she turned 25. The brownstone would stand here on Beacon Hill, weathering New England winters, holding the architecture of family within its brick walls. I lifted the coffee cup to my lips, tasted the bitter clarity, felt December wind against my face. The church bells finished their 8th chime. Shadows shortened against century-old brick. Traffic moved along Charles Street, taxis, delivery trucks, morning commuters navigating the city's crooked colonial streets. I closed my eyes, not because I was afraid to see, but because I'd finally seen enough. And to you, listening to my story, remember this: the people closest to you have the power to hurt you most, but they also reveal who you truly are when tested. I made a mistake trusting blindly without verifying. I saw the warning signs, Stellan's questions about the trust, Vivica's distance after her mother died. But I didn't want to believe my own daughter could betray me. Don't make my mistake. Love your family, yes, but protect what you've built. Trust doesn't mean closing your eyes to reality. The lesson I learned is this: when someone shows you who they are, believe them. Constance understood that lesson before I did. She planned for the worst while hoping for the best. That's not pessimism. That's wisdom. I believe God allowed me to go through this darkness so I could see clearly on the other side, not just with my restored vision, but with my understanding of what truly matters. It's not the money you leave behind. It's the people you protect and the legacy you build with intention, not assumption. Dad revenge isn't about destruction. It's about defending what your family worked generations to create. If this story resonated with you, I'd appreciate your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to protect your family from betrayal within? Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories about dad revenge, family justice, and standing up for what's right, please subscribe to Dad Family Revenge. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. Just a reminder: certain details in this story have been fictionalized to protect privacy and emphasize the lesson. What's real is the message about protecting your family and preparing for the unexpected.